Thanks for tuning in to Revolutionary Lumpen Radio. In this episode we feature Comrade Emily to discuss disability and Marxism too. Untouched as a topic, imaginary as a movement, berserk as a eugenicide in this real class struggle of lives taking place in the imperial court today. So obviously naturally we had to cover this in detail and total solidarity for this class of lumpen pros that share a similar ostracization as the other substratas of the lumpen. This episode is so important, so resourceful, that consequently we will return every 6 months to analyse the progress of the so-called left to determine if they have taken any steps whatsoever for solidarity and inclusivity to fight against the oppression of the disabled. History is not going to absolve you if you fail to listen, share and act on this topic. It does appear that besides us lumpen vanguard, nobody but the disabled themselves are crying out for help, for support and recognition as human beings, and not just costly accidental deformations of DNA in this mode of civilization that arouses itself by the breaking of people into reactionary pigs and defeatist sheep alike, by only determining their worth via their economic productivity that can be extracted from them as surplus labour value for the wage slaves capitalist pimps. From a Marxist perspective, a distinction must exist between impairment and disability, while accepting the existence of impairment as a biological reality and not denying the role of sociocultural determinants that operate at the superstructural level. It is important to recognise that the single most significant determinant of disability is the organisation of the mode of production based upon the maximization of profit. So in this episode we heighten this contradiction by force, declaring and denouncing the able-bodied supremacy over the disabled and impaired as Comrade Emily intellectually, emotionally invests in our education from her traumatic experiences and the oppression of both her and her friends lost. So in this episode we start off with the usual background checks, then discuss a very fascinating month-long visit when Comrade Emily went to live with an African tribe. We talk about how this shaped Emily's entire perspective on life, love and community in relation to the rancid reformist reality back at home in Scotland. So we discussed the NHS, healthcare, neurodivergence, disability politics, history, and then go on to being disabled, and then go on to being a disabled, impaired comrade organiser and activist, as well as the relations of the organisations to those impaired comrades, how they do or do not support, as well as how they can support the non-able-bodied, ripe for wage slavery people in the interest of revolution against capitalism. We go on to hear how we can all do more, how we can be more inclusive and supportive, which is what we're here for. That's why you can hear my voice now and why you're listening now, because we want to unite the proletariat. We want to better ourselves and thus our environment, society. We actually need to. None of you are listening for the good of your health. We appreciate that. Your mental health might suffer from this, to tell you the truth. But I also hope that none of you are also listening just to be in the know-how on the latest trend of Marxism to prove that you're cool. No, I mean, we're here now because this is the apex of synthesis right now currently, and you will not find this history and these visions from anywhere else, and if you do, you will find it as more as an intellectual exercise of opportunism, like the way recently many flaccid left-wing class-traded organisations post all over the fucking social media saying we stand with the neurodivergent while taking absolutely no fucking steps whatsoever to do anything for them. This is less than lip service. It's posting shit online for likes. So if you see that shit, ask them what they're actually doing materially on the ground to support them. or to actually change and empower them, rather than just fucking saying that they support them for fucking likes. These motherfucking these opportunist fucking organisations, countries, a fucking shit show. So again, this episode might damage your mental health. You've probably got a taste of that already, but genuinely, I'm being serious. I do hope that you suffer shell shock for some time off this episode. Indeed, I do hope that the trauma of our comrades is transferred from their neurons to yours, so that you sincerely, physically need to do more for them in order to feel good about your goddamn self, because these are fucking traumatized, tortured. Even reaching out to Emily here over Twitter, for example, or email, or through me, is like massively, hugely significant and beneficial for their mental health. So if you find this insightful or useful, or you just want to support a goddamn comrades who have been ostracised and aren't getting the support that is needed, definitely, please, I'm begging you, go out and speak to Emily. Just say, yeah, I listened to it, oh my god, you know, this and that. Just share your thoughts with it. It's so important. Feedback, honest to god, you can't underappreciate feedback. You can't underappreciate the power of feedback to empower our comrades more. So every single one of our traumatic experiences that we've all suffered under capitalism has to mean something. We must turn it into a revolutionary tool, or we're literally suffering for nothing. We have to share, learn and support each other through our struggle. Indeed, you must struggle, or you are complicit parasite to the global south and invite the wall in the future, if I have anything to say about it at least. The final note is I want to clarify that all three of us on this pod, talking your co-host and comrades, the Zen Marxist, Ryan, and myself, Shibby, with our guest Emily, we all stutter, we stammer, we say and we get words mixed up. So do all the other motherfuckers on other podcasts that you listen to. Like the reason I say this though is to remind you that this pod has been highly edited for easy listening, same as other podcasts that you probably listen to. Bear that in mind, and do not think that you are any less than any of us in eloquence. No, we're just simply normal people who are discussing extremely difficult and largely unspoken topics, as you might in the future. So I want to stress that, just so you don't think that like you're not as good as a speaker as any of us, because it's just likely just not true whatsoever. I also did leave in Emily's tics in solidarity with those who do have tics or Tourette's, because it is what it is, and I'm not capitalism. I just don't discriminate or exclude based on what I consider normal. What is normal? Normal is just putrid, detestable, parasitic abomination from what was once a majestic, godly Homo sapiens that was humanity for most of our history. And we've got no goddamn humanity. All we are little conniving little worm maggots fucking scurrying around for some coins. So if you want to support us in our lofty yet necessary goals, please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Lumpen podcast, where you can get bonus content. We give you the chance to ask our future guest questions, as well as know that your monetary support, unlike nearly all the other so-called socialist patrons out there, actually goes to feeding hungry people in my community, as I base build dual power in my local estate as a political strategy, rather than just say, help me pay my bills. You know, all these other motherfucking fools out there who are just bums. You can follow us for pictures and updates on the community organising by following us on Twitter at Lumpen_radio, or my Instagram is at Shibby's IG. Also support us and the disability movement by buying a Disability Marxism t-shirt in the show notes, and we'll donate £2 of each purchase to a revolutionary disability movement. Without further ado, that's the introduction. We bring you Disability and Marxism 2, Feet Emily. So what we're doing today is we're doing Disability and Marxism episode 2. We previously done the first episode, but you've probably seen them do and other works on YouTube. Today we're just doing a recording episode on a Discord server. Anybody can join a Discord server. It's the official subreddit Discord server, and also the official Discord server for Revolutionary Lumpen Radio podcast. So if you want to get on and ask our guests questions, we have all kinds of different guests. We have authors, academics, we have general lumpen proles, just normal motherfucking people. We have educators, agitators as well. I mean, just an array of different people. If you ever want to get on, ask them questions yourself, then you need to hit us up on Patreon as a Patreon supporter. There's that picture of what I want as my base in Liverpool, because that's a goal, to base build and actually have enough money to fucking have communist flags flying in city centres across all of the UK. The US aren't going to do it because, let's just face it, they're too scared to get and smoke like Fred Hampton.
I was also going to ask, like, are we going to keep any ticks in rather than, like, because I had issues in other places in times of freaking ticks.
I mean, that's it. When I was editing last time, I did intentionally leave some of them in because I almost felt like it would be wrong of me to remove them in a sense, because that's so much of who you are in your essence, and I didn't want to release the episode without any ticks, and then you just be like, oh, what the fuck's wrong with me, you know what I mean, when there's nothing wrong with you whatsoever. And also I wanted to do it as like a form of solidarity for those, with ticks or Tourette's, so that they had like a voice to listen to. But I'm obviously willing to listen to what you want and how you want that.
No, it's just that people get scared of like this and that, and we can go into that. But you want to start the show, because I'm kind of but yeah, I'm sure maybe should have said that in the pre-recording. But yeah, it's just one of those things where I've had experiences. I can go into that at some point of like getting it censored and stuff for my Tourette's. I mean, I don't mind it if I get to the mic off and I'm like ticking away in the background. But if I'm talking and I'm ticking, that's my line. But do you want to kind of get the ball rolling?
For sure.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Wankers.
Thanks again for tuning into Revolutionary Lumpen Radio. In this episode, we're humbled to have Emily back to continue on a series in disability and Marxism. We're going to be talking about disability in general, trying to get more of an insight. We're going to look on how that affects the political, social sphere, and we're also going to look at how disability in general is seen within Marxist circles, to have that, really deep analysis as to how we can improve as materialists. So, Emily, let's just get into it now with our usual background questions. So this is one of our favourite parts of the show, to get to know our guests, and it really helps inform us into, the rest of your answers. So can you just tell us about your background?
Yeah, hopefully I won't be here all day, because I've been politically engaged, shall we say, since the age of 16, and I'm going to be 29 in a couple of weeks. So that's quite a lot to cover. I'm Emily. I am a disability liberationist. None of that, disabled rights, bourgeois malarkey, revolutionary. I got started in politics. Should I go into my background, or just kind of go into how to get into politics as well? Like, kind of both. Basically what happened was that in about 2015, there was the whole stuff of Glen Eagles and the G8, and then also Make Poverty History. And then I got alienated from that. And then what happened was that I kind of wanted to know what the fuck happened with the 2008 financial crash, because I was about 15 at the time. And I'm like, well, what do you, and then obviously, of course, I was 9 when the 9/11 happened as well, and the War on Terror. So I grew up in the War on Terror. Then got internet, and it kind of was a wee bit all over the place with documentaries and the emerging kind of conspiracy culture, so like loose change and stuff like that. Then my friend Pat, who my dad knows, came back from Africa and got talking, and then they mentioned the Zeitgeist films. I watched them, and that made me go down the path to be in the Zeitgeist movement, which I'm still in, which is a economic and social sustainability movement. So it's basically trying to get to a communist society, what we would call a communist society, but coloured in rather than being vague. So they've got 3 major pillars, which is ecology, social and public health, and resource management. in machine government rather than humans, but under the control of human beings and a whole host of other things economically. So I'll be doing stalls and people will be like, oh, you fucking commie and all the rest of it at me. And basically all of that happened in terms of meeting people that were actually hardcore communists. We had people that were part of the World Socialist Party. We had people coming along and hearing from communists what communism is and how actually they see it as like really a really good idea of like it coloured in. And all we would discuss is a transition, like how would you get the revolution going, the transition going, technically, socially, you name it. Not debates, but discussions, and people going, you know what, there's more in common than we have differences, and talking about sustainability principles and a more kind of technical aspects of it. But I felt there was a hole missing in terms of like a social conscience, and also being in the socialist / economic areas and things like that of people that are communities of convenience. And then in 2009, I got diagnosed at the age of 17 with Asperger's syndrome, and that then started my dive into neurodiversity. And this is where my personal experiences of social and economic issues personally and schooling and everything else, and really dovetailed into my political work. And then sadly, due to personal issues, I was dipping in and out with personal issues in terms of family and other issues, my sexuality and stuff like that, and kind of having time off to do that. But then basically in 2014-15, really getting involved in proper disability politics with austerity, with the Lib Dem government, and then when my Tourette's became prominent in the late 2017, 2018, that's when I became a proper, I would say like a revolutionary disabled activist, and kind of getting exposed to revolutionary ideas. So this is where like getting a political consensus of me as a person in the wider revolution, and also reasons for revolution. I'm reading books like A Very Capitalist Condition and other radical disabled groups, because I was experiencing for the first time not just like underhanded sleight of hand disableism / ableism, but actually in your face like proper hardcore hate crimes and discrimination, which I had experiences of a child when I was quote unquote visibly autistic, quote unquote. So that radicalised me, and then obviously joining disabled ed organisations like Glasgow Disability Alliance, DPAC, Black Triangle, but then getting politically alienated, which we can talk about later in the show, about communists on the left ignoring disabled people and basically leave them to rot or use them as cudgels to hit over the Tory party over like cuts of benefits, more or less, and then leaving it out there. That process of alienation may be more and more radical, and I can go into that later on as well in the show, of being alienated by society, being kicked out of places, being excluded, seeing that my issues basically don't matter when they're talking about other issues like social issues, political issues. But my issues of seeing it firsthand of friends and colleagues and friends, more cynicals of COVID, kind of neglected and ignored, and that kind of maybe the point was like, you know what, this is my calling. Like, if we don't include disabled people and people that are drug addicts and Lumpen, basically, there is not going to be any revolution. It's going to be revolution for a certain cast of people that are non-disabled, white, you name it, or even if they are black or of different ethnicities, it's going to be a certain strata, and we are going to be seen as like disposable and basically either kill us or have eugenics or euthanasia and all this nasty shit to erase us and to make the perfect world utopian future. So that's what I'm kind of, at the moment, I'm kind of standing up instead of depending on other people and begging and pleading other organisations. I am in the process of making my own organisations and my own protests and my own visuals on disabled people, and basically starting the spark of the disabled uprising basically against the conditions. And that's basically where I'm at. So, yeah.
It's also important to realize that, like, you essentially were radicalized by your life, right? Like, you understood your position within society as an inherently political one, right? Like, I get the feeling that some people come to theory as a sort of purely intellectual exercise or something that's sort of detached from the real world, but the reality of the situation is that, like, as materialists, you should understand that your material condition within society, shapes your thoughts and opinions and feelings. So it's not a surprise at all, that someone in your position would, look around at the world and correctly identify that this world just isn't for me. It doesn't benefit for me. It's not built for me to thrive in, right?
Yeah, and I'm also going to say, Ryan, that because I had a good political education, I mean, a really good, thorough, social sciences, public health, I already had, because of the Zeitgeist movement, which is a good movement, it just has some particular problems, but it in terms of some moral values and some values in terms of revolutionary spirit, but the whole gist of actually having really good scientific data to back up our claims, rather than we're just going to talk about Marx and Engels fucking for forever. Having real hard science and then shifting that or pivoting to the social model, and then I'm going to talk about the relational model of labour later on as well, made it so that I could, in my mind, because my brain works, I can then, like, not collide, but kind of synthesize that data into, like, right, this is how disabled people are oppressed, this is how these marginalised people are oppressed economically, socially, all the strands of oppression and death and destruction and where it originates from, rather than being, oh, we need more rights because we deserve to be like everyone else. It's like, well, actually, everyone else is pretty fucked as well. So it's that, having that base helped me a lot, talking about, like, The Spirit Level by Kate Bennett and Dale Wilkinson, all the way through to Gabe Monte talking about mental health, and actually that actually helped a couple of family members, not to go much on a tangent, but of social issues and political issues and childhood issues by alienated parents and a whole bunch of other immediate family issues related to the material conditions of capitalism. Really had a really good foundation to then jumping into Marxism and Marxist thought, like hardcore Marxist thought, because I was kind of skirting around it for years until I took the jump like a couple of years ago. So I had a good foundation of real hard scientific data that's adjacent to Marxism, rather than, like, and that's why I'm still finding it difficult. It's like, are you just quoting Marx all the time, or Engels or Lenin? Where's the hard science? Where's the hard? I've got the science here. So it became a backing of, this is why I believe what I believe. Here's the books. Here's the sources. Here's the scientific evidence why we need socialism. A scientific case for socialism or communism, rather than a moral one or an ethical one. And then shifting that to, well, disabled people and actual people that need socialism to survive, period. I just want to kind of explain that's one of my problems about, that's one of the things that I'm kind of helped a lot in terms of my ideas about myself and where I am and my politics as a disabled comrade, having all that experience and knowledge, understandings before jumping in, like, helped me so much. And I think people kind of underestimate that level of reading and research and self-education, rather than just, oh, have you read Capital, have you read Marx? I'm like, yeah, but
So I mean, yeah, there's a lot there. I've got a feeling I'm not going to be able to respond to everything that I want to because of how much is going to be covered. Again, like, we do have a community on Discord. All of the comrades who you hear on a podcast are there. So if you personally want to ask any other guests or even us as co-hosts any questions to, engage in these questions further, absolutely do that. You'll find everything where to locate us in the show notes. But something that I do want to respond to is both Ryan's and your synthesis on the situation, in the sense that it was your experience, your life that radicalised you, that shown you the way for progress and a better society for everybody. And also the project of Revolutionary Lumpen Radio is to highlight the plight of the Lumpen proletariat, the most oppressed class, and disabled people are definitely, unquestionably, a part of that. The point I want to get at is, this is the vanguard. This is why I say Lumpen are the vanguard, because whilst everybody else, all these other Marxists, a majority of other Marxists, when they have to learn about the world, when they learn about all of these experiences, as you said, these people are reading Marx, reading Lenin, and just throwing quotes out because they don't have the life experience in order to progress. You're the one suffering. You're the one who is forced to say, no, this is wrong. Like in the speech which you made, you're talking about, the Scottish government forcing courts to no longer accept people with disabilities, or maybe specifically autists or something.
Yeah, the own witnesses. It did get kind of overturned, but it still happens to this very day, and you still have to go for a legal process. All it does is have like a legal process to fight back if that happens. It doesn't actually outlaw it personally. What Shibby's talking about is I did a speech where I talked about, I was at Women's March, and I talked about how women actually, with mental health issues, autism, and learning difficulties, where actually if had any crime whatsoever, including sexual crimes, they would get to the court, and then the judge would actually throw out the case and they couldn't testify in their own court case because they were quote unquote an unreliable witness and could not, as actual quote unquote, verify the accuracy of the statements by someone, and the competency of the witness. Therefore, you have to deem them as an unreliable witness.
Insane. So so the synthesis that we've made is that Marx, Lenin, Mao, it doesn't matter who it is in historical Marxist texts, they don't tell you what you've just told us, because history is always marching, and unquestionably, as George Jackson said, history is continuously gonna push new struggles, new movements, and this is the movement that's happening today. This is the movement that people need to get side by side with. The academics can sit back and talk about the disabled plight all they want, but the revolutionaries need to be with them. They need to be helping them move forward as the forefront of the most oppressed class. That's why we're doing this here, because Marxism's fucking slacking, and it unquestionably has, because so much of this shit's still going on. The disabled, as you've heard from Scottish courts, no resuscitation orders in the UK. This is continuously happening almost unflinchingly from so-called Marxists. This is not scientific theory.
It's also like one of the things it has in common with Zen Buddhism, right? Which is why I'm a Zen Buddhist, because like there's a ton of other religions who just essentially say like, all you need to do is read the book and believe in, everything will be fixed, right? But like Zen Buddhism is fundamentally places the experience as the crucial thing, right? Because you can read books on anything in the world, right? But until you experience it, you don't actually have first-hand thing. And I guess this is kind of a failing of language, because language is just fundamentally like not sufficient to actually explain something to someone. Like if you take any experience, like being drunk, okay? Now, if you wrote a book on that and then gave it to someone who's never drunk alcohol, right? They might have some kind of like intellectual understanding, but they don't know, right? They haven't experienced it.
Yeah, it's the same as people who they're like, when you're stoned, you're gonna be like, whoa, what's all that? And you just clearly have never smoked a joint in their life.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? You're right though. Mao says, on practice, you don't know how the pear tastes until you bite into it.
That's exactly exactly the same as Zen Buddhism.
The pear has to change for you to gain that knowledge, because you've took a bite out of it, and you also have to change because you've got the bite, and you now have these new lessons within us. So I think that many of the problems why people are so scared to confront the disabled plight and the lumpen plight is because it just absolutely annihilates everything they know as practice. But we're pushing forwards here.
I mean, I was going to say that's like almost exactly the same like example that I was given as well. Like I was listening to this like, Zen monk or whatever, and he was talking about the difference between like Zen Buddhism and the other two main, Theravada and Mahayana, right? And he was saying that like he was talking about a watermelon. He said, one of these sects, if you ask them to describe a watermelon, they'll talk to you about the life cycle when it grows up and it becomes a seed, and then you plant the seed, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, no, Zen Buddhism is this. If you want to know what a watermelon is, here's a watermelon, right? Bite it, right? So I think this is for me is how, sort of Zen Buddhism and Marxism come together, because they fundamentally place the experience above everything else, right? You can, again, I'm just going to end up repeating myself, but you can write books on anything you want, but until it's happened to you, it's not real to you, right? It's an intellectual exercise. It's not a life. It's not an experience.
Indeed.
I was going to say that the problem you actually got is that too many people intellectualize these problems rather than emotionalize them and actually internalize them. People get emotional about like a celebrity dying and all that kind of crap, but they find it hard to actually emotionally connect with people. It's actually it's not even empathy. It's humanity. And I'm a Wiccan, so I don't have any books. And my practice is basically you versus a goddess in the world.
Right.
And there's so many things that people experience in the mundane, which is a term people that are pagans and magic and druids and if I talk about. There's this world and then there's the other world of other forces and things. And people even here do not even are aware of, like, for example, are you aware of you sitting in your seat? Well, maybe you are, Ryan, because you're a Zen Buddhist and like maybe with mindfulness and shit. But it's that kind of thing of there's things in the environment that get normalized.
Oh, for sure.
And I feel that actually we can go into that what actually it is, and I'm going to be very distinct and very blunt, is that they can't cope with the idea that disabled people or Lumpen people suffering is actually a choice. A political, social choice, not an iron law of nature. And then they displace that rage or anger or upset at me, the victim blame and all the rest of it, because they emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, if you will, can't deal with what I'm saying and what we're saying. So they deflect, they get angry, they get upset, they say you're deviating from the teachings of Marx, they say that you're it's not really important why you're talking about that, because unlike every other group, disabled people question the rules of work, the rules of the fragility of the human of the body minds. Body and mind are one thing. There's no such thing as separation. Fuck you, Descartes. And also the value we put on human bodies and normality and all these value systems we absorbed. So therefore, it's just easier to expunge them. It's easier to forget about them. So, like, that's basically why, and that's what I kind of fight.
Just before I move on to another question, I just want to say that I agree to an extent on the aspect of it being a choice for the Lumpen people's oppression, because it's certainly a choice.
I mean, political.
Yeah, of course, you mean a political choice, because the ruling class people are making that choice as individuals to pass this through legislation, but it's not a choice for capitalism, for imperialism. It's an economic necessity.
Yes.
It's a necessity to oppress those who don't have the capability to be wage slaves for the large part. And so this is the same thing, and some of these, naive views that people had and that liberals had, and even extends into Marxist circles, which we're going to go on as we discuss healthcare. But this idea that, like, disabled people are a drain on the economy or a drain on benefits or anything else, it's really just fucking absurd. Yeah, just what I want to throw in there.
I mean, if you wanted to, we could even touch briefly on the body-mind problem, that Emily briefly touched on. So, I've heard people say things like Marx isn't a philosopher, right? And they just that's clearly someone who doesn't understand Marx or hasn't read them or at least understood the ideas, because you can understand the ideas without reading Marx, I guess. But the thing in the West was this huge, the body-mind problem, right? The separation between body and mind.
And I'm not onto it, Ryan. I've never heard of that motherfucking thing. You're going to have to clarify.
That's okay. The body-mind problem is, I mean, it's a solely Western construct, right? It's the idea that your mind is different from your body, essentially. That these are two distinct things. And again, this is another problem that Buddhism and Marxism have come to the same correct conclusion on, right? Because it's, again, within Zen Buddhism that says, no, there's no distinction here, right? No differenceness, no distinction, just one, right? And Marx literally materially proved that, essentially, because if you understand, materialism, you understand that your mind is the product of your surroundings, which is in part your body, right? And also, the other material conditions in the society around you, no doubt. But I mean, it's literally Zen Buddhism came to this conclusion, whatever it was, hundreds or thousands of years ago. And then Marx literally intellectualized it and essentially said, oh yeah, that I can show that that's true. Right. I mean, for me, this is just all the things that went together.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you could talk about all that shit, talk about mind and body and, the environment forging your mind and your thoughts and your actions and your culture and your behaviours, and then not be considered a philosopher. What the fuck have you got? What else have you got to do to be thinking like a philosopher? That's insane.
I mean, it's really just because they want to sort of say that just like Marx was just some asshole who was jealous of rich people, right? It's literally that they just want to sort of like pigeonhole his entire life into like, nah, he was just jealous of rich people, right? They don't want to actually give credence to any of his ideas or ponder for a second that this man might have like fundamentally understood differently the world around him, right?
That's it. So, I mean, as much as we give shit to Marx, we also lend him some credit where credit's due. This is, we're carrying on this critique. So, okay, we got into how did you get into politics specifically. It was 3 instances with different resources, such as like the Zeitgeist movement, you traveling to Africa. You were 18 years old,
18,
you went to Africa. I went to Amsterdam, bit of a difference.
Yeah, 18 years old. Yeah.
Yeah, so what did you go to Africa for? What was it like? What was your thoughts before you went there, and how did they differ from your thoughts afterwards?
Well, this is where I have conflict with third worldists and Maoists and all the rest of it, because it's from a Westerner's imperial core, and you absorb a lot of shite, right? I had to go through a year's training with my friend Pat of the norms, the language, not just the language, but the social norms, the power dynamics when you're being a white person in a former colonial country, and the legacy of that culture being imposed onto them, and all that kind of stuff. Before he was willing for me to go to Africa, I didn't just suddenly just go over, and I feel that a lot of people don't understand that me and Pat were invited. Someone contacted my friend Pat, who's me and my family call him Pat Africa, who's had 7 years in Malawi and about 7 or 8 years in Joburg within communities. And what happened was that a village reached out to him, and the chief, he had to go talk to the chief, and I had to talk to the chief, and it became this whole thing of gaining their trust and why we're there. And we were there not to impose anything, not our Western idea, not this white savior complex or help the noble savages bullshit. It was right, we're going to come to assess what you need. We're going to be walking in the community, we're going to stay in the community, we're going to sleep with a family, and the family's going to volunteer to take me and Pat in. I will not, so therefore what happens is that every attempt was made for me to integrate into the village that we were working with. And what happened was that the experiences of seeing actual poverty, and I was so lucky that we went at night time. We reached it. It was at night.
What do you mean by actual poverty?
We're talking about people that are basically, on the edge of starving to death. Like if they have a bad crop, they're basically fucked. They're basically going to starve to death. Level of poverty.
Fucking hell.
One incident that's about exploitation. People say, why are you hardcore anti-imperialist? I was like, when you see your friends. I was there for a month. I wish I could stay longer, but I had braces and I had other issues in college and other commitments. But I remember my friend coming home, and I'm like, "What's this? Do you go do you get payday and get some soap or something?" It's like, no, this is payday. It was like that's cheap, nasty soap you get in like super bargain stores, and it was like 100 bars of soap, and that you had to share it out for the family because that was payday. They got paid in soap. In the tea plantation I was at. Soap. Not money. Fucking soap. And other stuff I saw, and kids, the irony of, in mosquito nets that I was collecting dust because I didn't have enough money to buy it. And that's when I became like, even more anti-money than I was before in the monetary system and everything else, and going artificial scarcity and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, this shit's got to go. And people dying of malaria, and people dying of AIDS, and charities coming in and dumping as a gift, quote unquote, to people, and all the problems in it being cut up in the social political stuff.
Jesus Christ.
And there was a point, yeah, and I was like, imagine in a month you actually have, a friend basically got the flu and he was basically immobilized for a week because he got AIDS.
To elaborate on something, and this would also be great to highlight the viciousness of imperialism. I was going to ask this before you said this anyway, because I knew it was going to be there. You mentioned charities coming in, helping them out. Who was that? What the fuck were we doing? And then we're going to analyse that. Oxfam.
It was Oxfam, and no, you don't understand. And I've got evidence of this. This is not some Emily's got resentment. When I went on the plane, it was full of missionaries right, from the West, right? And all those missionaries have a religious and social enslavement process. I remember going to school and I had to challenge them. I was like, look, actually, are you saying that you would only feed them if they got a Bible? What the fuck? So it becomes this form of neo-colonialism. And you need to understand that when people talk, see when people say, oh, Emily, you don't understand, white privilege. It's like, oh, really? Have you had people literally bowing down to you as if you're fucking prince or princess? No, you haven't. You haven't had people literally bending down and kissing your fucking feet. My friend Pat had to condition me not to abuse that power of people really crying and going, and grabbing you and stuff like that, and people were scared of you, and I actually explain and having experience of elders in another village we visited, and they actually had PTSD flashbacks because of the colour of me and my friend's skin, and talking about their brother getting away in the camps, and so, don't take us to the camps, and shaking and having flashbacks of the British in that part of Africa, doing concentration camps in the 50s and the 60s and everything else, they were doing in
I was
Nigeria.
going to say it was somewhat recent when Britain would go in there and doing that shit.
Oh, it's the end of the British Empire. It was and I mean, I can be a whole podcast itself because I'm going to be in Africa and what I saw in that 1 month. But it was that kind of acceptance of there was no race issues after a point. It's you're just using your money and resources to enable to be independent. And there was a nearby village my friend Pat wanted to show me of they would actually make a base. This actually I've got a picture of this somewhere, and it's fucking horrible. The poverty was extreme. They would go there to shoot, to take pictures, to then do fundraising, and then not actually help the actual group. There's actually in IMF in the World Bank, I discovered this only a couple of years after being in Africa, I think 2012 or something, that there's actually agreements to cut up different parts of third world countries and have legal obligations for picking for a certain charity, like the Red Cross, whatever, to have jurisdiction in that area for charity work, as a legal thing. And if another charity comes in, as we said, me and Pat are the charity because we were basically freelancers. That's why we're allowed to go in, because legally, because we weren't a competing quote unquote charity. We're just two people that do gooders. But that whole process of them being exploited and being dependent then really began to kind of influence my disability politics of, oh my god, that's a similar dependence that's manufactured in school settings at that time, in economic settings, benefit settings. It began to really go about, they want people dependent, not independent. And that's when I realised, and also realised that their society was actually better than ours, culturally. Ubuntu, we are, no competition. I remember kids running back and forth, and they're like, between two trees, and I asked, who's winning? Because none of us are winning. They would wait till the slowest person catches up and then run again. Or they play football matches. It's like, who's winning? It's like, there's no winning. We're just playing. We're kicking about. We're taking football about.
Wow.
And I remember talking to somebody. Because you walk about and people are like, oh, where are you? It's like, oh, we're in that. Where's this fan that volunteered to take us in the village? You mean you're not in the, you're not in the township, like 15, 16 miles away, right, in a hotel? It's like, no, we're here, we're sleeping here. And people would wait outside to see you and greet you and go, and what got to me was that we asked if we can be invited because there was actually an initiation ceremony last couple of days before we had to leave and catch our flight. And it was an initiation ceremony of some boys becoming men. It's a traditional ceremony in that part of the village, and dancing through the whole village to get to the sheaf and everything. And when you have people crying, saying you're the first white people, the first outsiders that wanted to be part of the initiation ceremony, that's when it hits you of they just saw me as one of the tribe, and Pat, as an extension of their family, and having people cry and begging and grabbing you and said, please don't go, you're the best thing that ever happened to us, we love you, you're like, and someone say, you're like a second child to me, people saying that to you. And I'm going, and I thought, oh my god, how many people in the Western world would think that's crazy, of having such emotion and such attachment, such love and reverence. You don't want someone to go. It's seen as madness. And when I came back, I was like, actually a culture shock. Yeah, I don't need a shit in the pit. Yeah, I have running water and electricity. But the people here are deadened. I came back, I was like, oh my God, like, they're alienated, they're consumerist, they're traumatized. These people are dead. Like, these people are genuinely dead. If they showed the same amount of emotion, I mean, I had people singing while they were hoeing the land. You know, what's that? Yeah, right? People's like, wait,
Oh,
if he's
gorgeous.
sang a fucking if he sang, you know, it's about the sun and other parts,
Oh,
and it's singing
wow.
about the sun comes every day and Coachella, and it's that kind of and a rhythm. It's I don't even know about the It's very similar to what you get in like in old Scotland, where like the women that would do the dyeing and the cloth making, where they would thump the song. The song would be for a working song as they were dyeing or and dealing with the cloth, dyeing the cloth. And it's just one of those things where I realised that there was a humanity there that was lost. Like the idea that and this is where I get to see the socialists, that our security is the security of everyone around you. If someone's in poverty or a drug addict or something like that due to influences outside of their control, right, and they rob from you, that's actually because of the social and economic conditions. Because I met somebody that the crop failed, and the nearby neighbour was like, "Oh, we'll give you some of my crop, so your kids don't starve." And I said, "Why are you doing that?" He says, "I'd rather give him the food so his children, him doesn't starve, than him out of desperation taking it by force and disrupting the goodwill in the village." And stuff like that. There was another case of a man that had to borrow a bike that was sitting there for a job interview, and he came back, and the guy said, "Oh, I said you watched the bikes." Well, this guy was in a suit. He was obviously for a job interview. And I thought, they're going to kick off. It's like, "Oh, I got worried, about my bike." I said, "Oh, I had to borrow it. There you go. It's in good condition. There's nothing wrong." And that was the end of it. In the West, you get kicked in. Like, if some working class person took a bike, they would be like, "Oh." And it's that kind of realization when you get out of that culture. They accepted my differences, they accepted my eccentricities. They asked, when I asked how are you, asked generally how the fuck are you? None of this how are you small talk. And so when I came back, I became more alienated from society, of their values and everything else, and I got more alienated from a lot of other people where obviously didn't have that experience, as we were saying earlier. They didn't have experience of death and destruction, yet people been happy with life and singing and dancing and community and going, you know what, we're all we're all in this shit together, but we're going to struggle together and have a vision of all of us being successful, not money or anything like that, but being a doctor or a nurse or a teacher or an engineer, something practical, not a celebrity. And I realised that super alienated when I came back socially, emotionally, and everything else, and then obviously the disabled stuff as well made it more acute. That's when I kind of felt I don't want to live in this kind of society. Really, that's basically me. Really, uh,
Well, Sam, this is one of the things that I'm sure Ryan will agree that we absolutely should have an Africa and Marxism series and talk about imperialism overall over Africa, and get more people on who have had experiences in Africa. The things you shared with us, 18 years old, being accepted by a tribe, you see, tribe for a lesser word, for like these cultures getting together and not even like having races to defeat one another, but just in the purpose of fun, interest, health, and yeah, again, just solidarity, sister, just getting accepted by a fucking chieftain and then blowing minds when it shows that you're literally like, not an evil scumbag and you want to
yeah,
be accepted by them because you see them as human beings, not just human beings, but people more in touch with themselves. And I think that what we should get out of that is the fact that the state that everybody defends over here like pigs, and the pigs actually do, it's the state that's separating everybody apart. The state forces alienation from us. It forces us to go to work. We don't have communities. We don't have these things. And, it keeps us separate. But when you have a state that doesn't even care about its own people, and the state only serves the ruling classes in the country in which you went to, of course, you're going to see more community naturally, because that's what human beings are without a state, without capitalism, and without a ruling class or class structured society.
We could do a series. We could do a series on like Pan-Africanism, or we can even talk about like individual people, right? We can do an episode on like Patrice Lumumba. We can do one on Thomas Sankara. We can do one on Marcus Garvey,
Yes.
right? Like we could do that for sure.
Yeah, but I think the thing that gets to me is that for my politics of post-racial theory, because I'm at the point I'm like, well, if you're not fighting the legal and social and everything stuff and actually making it a non-thing and that like I was in that village, you're not really into liberation. But the difference is that there's no political or social capital talking about disabled people, you know? Because then it's like, association. If you associate with those kind of people, then it brings down your brand status if you're online or if you're an organization. And I think I told you like last night that 70%, it was actually 74% of people, I think it was the Earth Molly poll, I think it was like 2015 or something, said that they'll be extremely uncomfortable being around disabled people to the point of avoidance in public and private. And only 14% of people would say they would invite a disabled colleague, friend, what have you, to their homes. And I think that's informing to go, right, you don't care about disabled people because we make you so uncomfortable, you would literally avoid us in the street. Imagine if someone says, oh yeah, I've said to people, like, okay, guess who this minority I'm talking about when I see these figures? I say racism or homophobia. I say, no, it's disabled people. Like 74% of people will avoid disabled people completely. And then that happens in Marxist spaces and stuff like that.
It is Autism Awareness Month, April. Everybody's probably heard of autism in their life. It seems like a colour for so many people. People have heard about different kind of spectrums and shit. But for like those who don't know, like what is autism? Could you provide us an answer to that, and then also go into the question on what disabilities do you have that you're willing to state, in the interest of solidarity for any other potential disabled listeners? And for educational purposes for us normies?
Yeah, well, autism, it depends who you ask. If you ask a medical doctor, you'll pathologize it. If you ask a fucking people that are relatives, you have a different answer. But very few people ask autistic people, like myself, what autism actually is. Autism is a different way of expressing ourselves, emotional processing, and processing the environment around us, and a different behavioural profile to the norm. The problem you've got is that the idea of normalcy, which we can get into a wee bit later, I can get into a wee bit, but autistic people are people that are wired differently for different social and neurological skill set in the way they look at the world. And I'm also going to say that when people ask that question, there's a hint of really probing, I know not you, Shibby, but of probing, how disabled are you really? So it becomes like, oh, you're autistic, you don't look autistic. Oh no, and I joke, I think you're thinking about Down syndrome. That really makes them blush. And then Tourette syndrome, and you might hear, not too ticky today, but squeak squawks, people, all the rest of it. Emotional unstable personality disorder, I got diagnosed with that 2 years ago due to my own personal experiences living in this society. And dyspraxia and dyslexia. Now, dyspraxia is a motor control issue and it also affects planning. And dyslexia is, well, dyslexia. But I'm going to say that when people ask that as in a medical context, how medically messed up are you? In your functioning, inverted commas, which is actually kind of a bit of a joke, because functioning actually means most disability benefits and how disability is defined in appealing countries is your ability to work. Right? You're disabled because you can't work in a factory or an office or what have you. So for me, it's a very different, and that's why a lot of disabled people struggle to speak up, like I have, because it becomes, oh, how bad is your Tourette's really? How bad is your autism really? How bad is your mental health issues really? It becomes not even victim blaming. It becomes you just cut people up and go, well, you need to prove how disabled you are to me for me to then accept you're disabled. Because most people think someone in a wheelchair is disabled or it's really, really horrible. And I'm going, well, actually, you all make it horrible because the social and relational model of disability, of barriers, social issues. So autism is a disability, but is a social disability. by unaccepting, and I would actually say deadly society. For example, actually this time last month, the first of March is Disabled Day of Mourning, and that is, and the majority of those people murdered, which is that we've got 1,500 people confirmed from 2008-9. Over 200 of them are in the UK. It's probably more. It's really underreported, but this is like news stuff and things like that gets in the news. Of people that get murdered by their carers and family. And the biggest quote unquote disability that gets murdered is people with intellectual disabilities and autism. And there's been a spike in them because of COVID-19 and a lot of the rhetoric. And it was a case of a woman, I think it was in Sheffield or something, where she murdered her 2 boys. Instead of being arrested for manslaughter, she got put in quote unquote a mental institution. That's what I mean, and that's what a lot of disabled people mean, and other stuff as well of making go into, of saying that it's okay to kill disabled people and autistic people. So for me personally, it's been a big thing of accepting my differences in the face of a society that literally wants me dead. They'd rather me be dead in a ditch or by suicide or what have you, or euthanasia, inverted commas, than me living. So because we talk about the right for disabled people to die in this culture, but don't talk about the right for disabled people to live in this culture. And I call Autism Awareness Month Autism Charity Awareness, because not many people know what the hell autism is, and I'm sure Ryan, you can speak from your own experience of how people still think Rain Man is a good representation of autism.
Oh my god, that's so insane. I was literally about to tell a story including that. Because like people don't know, I also have like they say it's Asperger's, but whatever. I was literally just about to tell a story including that. That's insane. All right, I'll tell a story. So yeah, I have Asperger's, whatever. Like it doesn't really affect my life. Like people would say I was quote unquote normal, whatever, right? It's not like...
What the hell is it?
So they used to call it Asperger's syndrome, but now it's just sort of included in what they call ASD, which is like autism spectrum disorder, which is like...
So it just makes you super smart and super clever and you can count cards. I'm messing.
Well, you see, here's the thing, right? Like, that's kind of where I'm going with this, right? Because, like, I'm not great at math, right? Never was, even at school and everything, right? But people, like, knew I had Asperger's, whatever. So one day, some dude's like, yo, you want to go to a casino? And I'm like, why would I do that? Like, I've never expressed any interest in a casino or anything. And he's like, yeah, but you have autism, right? I'm like, yeah, not really sure what this has to do with anything. He's like, oh, come on, man. Like, you can count cards for me. Like, you can do that Rain Man shit. And I was just equal parts, like, hilarious and, like, what is life right now, right? Like,
yeah, it's happened to me a couple of times. I was like, you do know I actually failed maths completely. But that's part of the exploitation. He's trying,
totally.
to get something out of you. And I'm going to be straight right. I've had issues in the neurodiversity movement because a lot of my liberals, we were talking about autism as part of the diversity of humanity and depathologization. But I'm like, yeah, but you're begging and pleading employers to see how you can exploit our natural neurological neurodivergent talents to make you more profit. Like Microsoft and big tech companies, like, oh yes, the good pattern recognition and good pattern thinkers. Let's employ them to see errors in code. And I'm like, yeah. And there's actually the National Autistic Society did a study and found that 84% of all autistic people are unemployed.
Yeah, that's an insane statistic.
84.
Wow.
Yeah.
So once you add up all of these percentages, all these statistics, of course, you're going to have a society that is basically just saying it's a lot easier if you did not exist. Because what we're talking about here is an inconvenience in a society that is trying to make us alienated from love, from solidarity, from caring about one another. So once the cognitive dissonance is right in front of you, which is another human being that has a beating heart and feelings, such as yourself, then you're left with that cognitive dissonance going on in your mind, like, oh, 2 opposing thoughts acting simultaneously. I should be a good person. I should be good to them. But society would look at me like I'm special for handing out a hand and seeing them as a real human being. It's fucking insane. Just my thoughts on that. I don't know whether you could elaborate on that anything. And Ryan, thanks for mentioning that. I love you.
Oh, good.
let's just go all nuclear, shall we?
Let's go.
Let's go fucking nuclear, and I think can segue in very quickly because I'm going to touch on NHS and stuff like that.
Let's go nuclear, because you also have had experience with our great free healthcare, the National Health Service. How do you feel about the treatment or service this provides for you, and also have raised the nuclear silo bunkers, so go mad?
I've been saving this for like the past like hour or so. Basically, the NHS is actually not socialist. It is actually because of the the Beveridge Report of 1943, which was the report that then made the NHS and the modern welfare state is inherently got eugenics in it, because Beveridge was a eugenicist. In other words, if you were disabled, right, and chronically disabled, you would actually be denied healthcare and no benefits whatsoever. Only if you're got war injuries, etc., would you actually be able to get healthcare, proper healthcare, and also benefits. But also people talk about, oh, the NHS is great. It's all right. It's great, is it? It's great, right? MinCap did a study, and I'll post a study at some point because I've got it, that found that 2,000 people a year with learning difficulties and autism died due to medical negligence in the NHS. That includes, and actually they'd be stamped with a low priority in hospital. That was in 2018, before COVID-19. Then we've got the NICE guidelines that's basically stated that, like in camps of dependence, but I'm going to say it here, that literally, if you're disabled, even if you've got COVID-19, you would not be a priority patient in the NHS. We've also got, you've briefly touched on it, but you've got the do not resuscitate and do not treat orders of people with intellectual disabilities systemically giving out, including up here in Scotland. 3 out of 5 cases of deaths of COVID in Scotland have been disabled people in the community. And the Office of National Statistics states that 70%, up to 70%, and this is probably a low estimate because that only includes hospitalizations and not deaths in the community, of all deaths are disabled people. So anyone watching this in the UK and then see the death, just remember that 70% of those deaths are preventable deaths by disabled people. 90,000 people, and yet there is no outrage. And also, remember this time last year, our great, glorious leader, Boris Johnson, and the other media lackeys basically said, oh, don't worry, only older people or people with underlying health conditions will be affected. This is the case here. After 10 years of austerity, after 20,000 people dying directly, and I've got this in black and white, but the DWP in Whitehall destroying social care, destroying benefits of people actually dying and covering up, right? And the fascist DWP covering up benefit deaths. I'm at the point where I'm like, yeah, society literally wants me dead the way it's been treating disabled people during COVID-19 as disposable. Me and my friends as disposable. I've had 2 friends die due to indifferent carers, and they actually got COVID-19 and died in my disability charity in person, and we did a vigil for them. And this is the point where we're so marginalised, we are so othered. In an excellent book, The War on Disabled People, that we're so othered that our death is seen as a release from suffering. People think I suffer. People think that my life is horrible, and therefore, if I die, I'll be quote-unquote released from my suffering. Imagine if, for example, and people might not like the comparison, but I'm going to do it, right? I'm going to do it. Imagine if George Floyd died, and people go, well, you know, he's out of his misery now. You know, being black is so horrible. You know, they suffer unnecessarily, and now he's out of his misery.
Wow.
They would be fucked, right? They would be fired. There'll be a shitstorm. But people did defend them. When I talk about this, people shrug their shoulders, you know, what can you do? It's nature's way. Oh yeah, nature's way to let a virus sweep through the country and be guided and corralled into care homes, into sheltered housing, into disabled people and elderly people to die. No, that's not natural. It's eugenics. People go, oh well, it's not. Yeah, it is. Like this is eugenics by other means. In times of crisis, the state goes down to eugenics, and I'm just going to say outright: That's why I'm angry that George Floyd dies, massive protests. That woman in Chatham, she dies, massive fucking protests. And this epiphany hit me this weekend.
Say it, it's fucking woke. Minds are gonna be blown right now.
If I died, I realise that there'll be an apathy and indifference apart from my friends and my family and my comrades, that there will not be an outrage if I get killed by the state. I'll be seen as statistically, I'll be seen as an unfortunate accident, inverted commas, or just the way my life goes, right? And this is the problem, that we're so marginalised that when we die at the scale we're dying in the UK, in the United States, and across Europe by COVID-19, who speaks for us? Who is out in the streets? Who is holding vigils like I did, and I sobbed on the 1st of March, of including people that died due to getting murdered by the state and getting murdered by their own mum and dads, and they get and actually and some of them until very recently have been trying to get away with it. And there's a whole point of like them excusing it. Oh, she snapped. She was beyond breaking point. And I'm going to say this right now. Only people that are disabled, their families and their friends go to that vigil, either online or in person, or cry about my fucking death or any other death of my people. And I'm going to say this right now, and anyone listening right now, I bet you're the few people that clicked on that has some tangential interest. There's people that see disability and go, it's not my issue. And that's the problem, Shibby. They see that if it was race issue, I'm going to click on that, no hesitation. Gender issue, click on that. LGBT issue, I'm going to click on that. Class issue, I'm going to click on that. Oh, disability, oh, doesn't affect me. None of my family's disabled. Fuck that, I'm going to avoid it. Right? I'm going to say this right now. Society and most people listening to this and everything else, if you don't come out, if you don't share this shit, if you don't share this podcast, my links to reach out to disabled charities like Disabled Run, right, and radical disability organisations, you are my oppressor. You accept passively the death of my people. You accept that 90,000 disabled people dying in a genocide is okay. And I'm going to say that and scream at that to everyone that can hear. You are accepting a genocide, or the weaker genocide. Oh, well, it doesn't fucking exist. Or the genocide of this and there, right? All this, but genocide of disabled people, nah, doesn't fucking matter. And in fact, do you want me to read out that quote that I did in my speech?
I think I know what you're talking about, and I think Ryan could follow up with the social murder.
Yeah, the social murder one, and that'd be a good bit to put in here. This gets me so bad because the ignorance and everything else and the lack of exposure in an apartheid state of disabled people allows this to happen. We're in the social conditions that allow disabled people to die. This is the point I want people to get. Society conditions you to accept that us not being around is normal. Disabled people, quote unquote, shouldn't exist, quote unquote. Therefore, if they're not in society, if they're not in public spaces, not in political spaces, that's a good thing because they're not meant to be here. Period. Or due to medical advances, inverted commas, or should be aborted, or killed, or euthanized, or what have you. They should be dealt with. And I'm going to say here, fuck you, and fuck everybody that has ever thought that. And I'm going to, obviously, later in the show, I'm going to do a lovely little roast list at some point of the people that are complicit in the silence of my people, a conspiracy of silence on this issue. And I'm saying, now's the time, I'm starting this shit. I'm starting this revolution. I'm starting this uprising of disabled people.
What the fuck have you got to lose other than your fucking change?
Exactly. I got nothing left to fucking lose. Everyone else I've got are clinging on to their friggin' lives. And I'm at the point where it's like, either you join behind me after this podcast, get in touch with me with my public email and my Twitter, and start joining shit, or, as Fred Hampton says, if you're not for the revolution, get out of the way. Okay?
Would you?
Okay.
So that is just there needs to be said. If you're not sharing, you're not supporting our comrades. Literally, Vanguard shit. This is a Vanguard member speaking to you, telling you the conditions that we're living in right now, if you dare try and respond with some bullshit to try and oppose Comrade Emily's fucking life experience with some ancient text, catch me outside, because honest to God, some of yous need your literal heads taken off. So listen, fucking Ryan, could you go into that with Engels' analysis on social murder and just try and put that for those people who have done nothing other than fucking read text to put it in fucking perspective for those motherfuckers?
Yeah, I mean, listen, social murder is the idea that something that people think is like a natural system is actually the choice of individuals, right? Because within, sort of bourgeois society, things get naturalized. People just say, oh yeah, that's just nature. That's just how things are. We touched on it earlier when we talked about the sort of do not resuscitate orders or, the deaths of disabled people during COVID. People will say, oh, that's just how it is. Like someone's got to die from it, right? So, I mean, it's got to be someone, right? And this is what Engels coined as social murder. It first made an appearance in his 1845 work, The Condition of the Working Class in England. It's this idea, I won't give the whole quote because it is kind of old-timey and wordy, I guess. But the idea here is that if someone stabs someone in the face and they die, that's murder and it's obvious, right? If you're sort of driving a car and you look down briefly to touch your phone and you hit someone, okay, it's manslaughter, right? You didn't intend it. But for some reason, when bourgeois society relegates certain sections of society and puts them in conditions that will eventually kill them, but just slowly, right? People never think of these things as being an actual choice. They never think of this as being, an active murder, essentially, on behalf of the bourgeoisie, right? They just never see it that way because it just becomes, oh yeah, but they're just poor. That's just how it is. Someone's got to, of course, every society's got a group of people over there that, just sort of die a little bit.
Fucking hell.
So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I use that with a lot of comrades, that's what disabled people have, to the extreme. That will have euthanasia, like Bill C7, where it includes people with mental illness in Canada, allowed to basically legally kill themselves. And yet Canada's completely usurping and destroying all social care and benefits, actually one of the worst in America in terms of, living under the poverty line. So it becomes a thing of either suffer under our capitalist system or kill yourself, and we save money. That's seen as okay, because that's the sharp end of what you're talking about, Ryan, that social murder. Where they make the conditions and then they offer it to disabled people, oh, look, we'll let you kill yourself, we'll let you die with dignity.
Right.
And I'm like, you didn't let me live with dignity, fuck off. You know what I mean? And people go, oh yeah, but. So there's no fucking but. Because in Canada, 5 years ago, it was only people with terminal illnesses would get it. Now it's everyone that's disabled after 5 years. So you can't just have one group of people that get murdered. It's basically, it creeps into other sections of society and other marginalized groups. It doesn't just stay in that particular thing. There's pressure groups. There's a whole bunch of other people that end up wanting to die. And that's the point where it's I want to live in a world where I'm not talking about the death and destruction and all this really hardcore, really emotional stuff, talking about disability. I don't want to talk about, oh wow, we've got almost 100,000 deaths of disabled people in the UK, or people living in squalor, or kids being scared of getting murdered by their parents because they're autistic, or what have you. I don't want to live in a world where we're talking about the levels of death of my particular people, which is astounding. And just talk about life, talk about political shit,
Yes.
talk about thriving. People go, that's quite heavy. It's I need to deal with that every fucking day. I've had to counsel friends that basically said, you know what, if you get COVID-19, I'm not going to treat you. Disabled people I know had to disown family members because of the rhetoric of COVID-19. That's serious.
Wow.
I'm not making it up to be hyperbolic. And that's where I get my anger. That's where I get my anger. It's who the fuck is saying any of this stuff we're saying on this podcast today? I've got to raise it. I've got to say, excuse me, I'm going to be the expert into the emotional labour and freaking re-traumatise myself of actually you to try and attempt to actually give a shit enough to actually not want me actually dead or apathetic, Ryan said, or it's natural for you to die. It's natural for you to have COVID-19. It's natural for you to have a suffering life. And I say this to people, the most radical thing that I am, more than my thoughts, more than my revolutionary spirit, actually, is me being a happy, contented, self-loving, disabled woman.
Amazing. So we'll continue this with a contradiction, but can I just say, thank you so much for all your answers. They're really interesting and fascinating. People need, it's the truth, isn't it? you waking up, you're talking about death when we should be trying to fucking talk about life. Again, this is something we'll continue to do every now and again. We'll have an episode where we're just talking beyond politics, beyond socialism, beyond communism, because, I mean, we need to at the same time be progressive and work against the forces that are trying to repress us, while at the same time plan a vision of what the future can be. And I think that you touched on that by saying you just want to talk about life rather than death.
I mean, that thing about like the naturalization of systems, right? Like I saw people temporarily realize that like last year in real time. During like the first year of COVID and everything, I think the government decided to like house all homeless people in hotels, right? They essentially decided just to put all homeless people in hotels. And I saw people on Twitter like, you know, these are sort of like the sort of neoliberal types, but ultimately there are sort of people who have been abused by that ideology who really thought that it was the truth, you know, and they were saying things like, wait, you mean that we could have just decided to house homeless people this entire time, right? Because they honestly believe and buy into an ideology that tells them that, no, homeless people is a necessity. It has to happen, right? It cannot be any other way than this, right? So they really are like abused by that ideology. And then one day they wake up to news that the government's just housed every homeless person. And they're like, wait a minute, you've been telling me this entire time that they had to be homeless, right? That this was a necessity, that it couldn't be any other way. You're telling me that this was a choice this entire time. Like the government just woke up one day and was like, okay, we're going to just get away with this. Right?
Interesting.
And they finally realized it. They were like, wait a minute, this whole thing's a choice. And it's like, yeah, that's right. It's a choice. Like every single day you wake up and the government has decided to keep homeless people homeless today. Like every single day it's a choice, minute by minute, right? Like that is a choice they are making. By not doing anything about it, they are making the choice to continue to have people be homeless.
Yep. And whenever people reiterate some of the arguments that they would use where it's their fault, it's just, oh, the immigrants or this and that. I mean, they've been coerced into saying that, and they're given consent in order to keep homeless people on the streets and in order to make sure that there's people who aren't supported in any way, shape or form by the state, while the state continues to support capitalists in the form of like billions of fucking bank bailouts and shit.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of crystallized the idea to me that like these people are just as a victim of that ideology as other people, right? Because these people really were like, wait a minute, like they really bought into the ideology. Like they really thought that homeless people were a necessity. Like it had to be this way and couldn't be any other way. So suddenly when one day they wake up and it's like, oh, the government's just decided to end that, right? That for them, I'm sure that like rocked their world. They were like, whoa. You've told me this whole time that it couldn't be any other way. And then you just woke up one day and you were like, well, we solved that problem. Don't worry about it. Right. And I literally saw liberals like, no. You can't you just did this. You just changed your mind one day. You just clicked your fingers and housed all of these homeless people. Like, why don't we just do that every day? It's like, yeah, exactly. That's because it's an ideology. It's a choice. Every day they don't house those people. They are choosing not to house those people. It's really simple. And I was also going to say, like, make no mistake, like, obviously the government didn't do it because they discovered a heart one day, right? Like, obviously they did it for purely selfish economic reasons, no doubt. But if it wasn't possible to do it, then they wouldn't have been able to do it, if that makes sense, right? And the people that buy into that ideology really thought that, like, no, it is an impossibility, right? Something, market forces, something, like, you cannot put these people in homes. And then, lo and behold, they wake up one day and it's like, oh yeah, we did that. And obviously it was for purely selfish reasons, right? It was for capital, ultimately, like everything is, right? Because at this point, they realize that people are contagious, right? So like if homeless people catch it, and then that means, you know, you're not special. You're not biologically special just because you're a member of the bourgeoisie, right? Like you can catch the virus from a homeless person. Of course you can. You're both human.
The point that I say is that like the labour relations theory of disability, we're the only group that's actually oppressed because we can't work. And I think you touched upon it, but people understand that if because of productive time, accommodations, releasing is less profitable, and the ruling class is like, well, why should I employ you when there's like a surplus army of labour or people on the dole, like ready to kind of take that place? So that's why actual employment for disabled people is in the 20s and 30%, like depending on like where you go. It's literally a lot low because they're literally saying it's unemployable. I am unemployable. And what the homeless people actually are people that are lumpen, are people that are actually, they are a social element of, if you don't go to your job, if you strike, it's a subtext of, if you resist, you be like that person over there. So be a good boy and girl and
Right.
just continue going up to work and go to McDonald's even during COVID-19 and, be a good worker. That's the actual main point of it. It's not even about economics. It's about a form of social coercion. That's what homelessness actually is. And no one's willing to actually say that because it's also economic and it's not sort of issues about housing and rents. It's like, no, they're there to basically scale the shit out of the working and middle class.
Definitely.
It's like, oh, well, you be careful, or you become disabled. I'm like, it only takes one car crash, mate, and you're going to be disabled. Like 84% of all disabilities are acquired, like old age or
Yep.
what have you, or catching a disease like COVID-19, getting long COVID, cough, cough.
Of course, thank you for your answer on your experience with NHS, the system that's proven to not be as amazing that everybody else in the world makes out it is to be, so they need to be named and shamed for that. But more specifically, are there any better alternatives for healthcare in the world that you'd prefer regarding the treatment and support for disabled?
Well, the problem is, apart from some outliers like some parts of the Soviet Union and some parts of Cuba, there hasn't been a revolutionary decision about healthcare for disabled people, really, that I've seen. What I mean by that is the idea of a normal body mind, which actually has infected almost everything in society, and it's actually the heart of capitalism. It's actually the heart. Disability did not exist until the labour relations of capitalism, because you need to measure, how much can someone physically work, mentally work, push them to the limit. So then it becomes anything is we go, well, these are hyperproductive people versus these unproductive people. And that, for example, dyslexia did become a thing until the need for education to run the machines in the factories and everything else. So it wasn't even recognised until the social and economic conditions changed. All disabilities are social relationally dependent. There's a social and economic component. It's not static. You're not disabled. And disablement is when forces and social and economic forces disable you. So you've got your impairment, which is the condition or the body-mind difference. And then you've got the actual disability or disablement process of capitalism. So when people talk about all the medical stuff, well, we've got the Mental Health Act in the UK, which is draconian, where I've almost been sectioned myself, and I've seen friends being sectioned, where you can be forcibly treated. You can't leave. You legally can't leave, even if you want to, even if you've got the mental capacity to leave. You need to convince a doctor to send you out of a facility. You're basically imprisoned with less rights than a prisoner. And by the way, there have been massive deaths of people in mental wards and mental hospitals, but who gives a fuck about them? So when people talk about treatment, I ask, is it to maintain a certain level of functionality and to minimize impairment by the choice of the person? Or is it the rationalization of a corporate seeing everything? When you see everything, when you're old Andrews, you see every hammer, everything looks like a nail. And we've not accepted that the values, the outlook of how we see disabled people is by a medical industry. The medical industry is actually reform of the eugenics view of disabled people. So therefore, there's a problem, because I've said to disabled people, we need to have a new model of bodily autonomy and bodily intervention, rather than, well, you're against the norm, the average, comparing you to the average, and therefore I'm going to get you closer to the average. If I had to say to somebody, well, black people are a minority, they suffer from a middling condition and they actually need to be whitened, people be outraged about that. But that's the normative value. In fact, the word normal comes from Francis Galton. Every time someone says, what is normal? Say, well, actually, normal is the social and economic values and valuing a human being in your life. So what happens is that the medical model was used, the medical establishment has been and continues to be used in NHS and in other parts of the world, of a way of making disabled people, quote unquote, less impairment enough to go into the workforce. It's not about their welfare. It's not about them being good people or minimizing so they can have daily living and getting to and stabilizing themselves in ways of dealing and working around the limitations of the body-mind. A good example of this, actually, recently has been mental health treatment in the UK has been reformed, and there's an excellent group talks about this called Recovery in the Bin, where instead of being led by disabled people and people with mental health conditions or mental distress, they've actually put it, and I've got video out there, so I need to go and check it out, but I can send it your way, Shibby and Ryan, you'd be find it interesting, where work in and of itself and getting a job and maintaining a job is seen as a mental health outcome. Yeah, you heard that right. So not the well-being of the person, not friends, family, hobbies, all the elements of humanity. The very capitalist notion of can they hold and maintain a job? It's their fault. They're not trying hard enough. They're not adjusting to the social economic conditions
Yes.
being re-engineered. And there's also an excellent book because we forget that the whole medical establishment is for profit. There's an excellent book on this called Medicalization of Society. And it goes about how there's new markets and how normal gets smaller and smaller and smaller to medicate for interventions. And there's excellent documentary, I think it's like Bleeding Edge or something like that on Netflix, about the issues with like prosthetics of other medical instruments actually messing people up. So there's a whole bunch of documentation and things like that about actually the only way people actually see disabled people as a medical dysfunction. That's why I don't like talking about it, because it becomes, oh, have you got good treatment for your Tourette's? Have you had good mental health treatment? Well, no, because it's all to make you normal. It's all to make you fit into society and possibly do have a job, be accumulating for capital. If you can't get to that point, then you're resisting treatment. You're being uppity by not trying hard enough. These are moral values, not scientific values. So therefore, what happens is it's actually a form of depoliticization. We talk about the medical side of disability. If we're not careful, we actually engage in the process of depoliticization of disabled bodies and disabled minds. Because when we're doing that, it's an individualistic approach. We're talking about the individual who's autistic, Tourette's, got this condition, a wheelchair user. We're not talking about the lack of ability to talk about different bodies and different minds and not even accommodating them, but accepting them. Accepting this is the price of having a body or a mind, that things don't work properly or they come in a different configuration or this and that. And it's part of human diversity. Yeah, there can be problems. Yeah, there can be issues. For me, it's very much like it's need to be celebrated. It needs to be led by the person. I'll give you a very quick example before we can move on. In the Tourette's community, there was a case where a friend went to get to the doctor and the mum asked, oh, is there any pills for him? The doctor turned to her and said, actually, it's for the kid to decide, because is this pill for society or is this pill to manage his condition so it gets out of his way of his life? And I think when we talk about it, it's about acceptance of being quote-unquote normal, being socially acceptable and being on the less uncomfortable spectrum of disability that we talked about earlier, and therefore depoliticized to the point where people ask, how is disability a political issue? Because all we hear is doctors and medical professionals controlling your life. We can talk about healthcare, we can talk about the care system and stuff like that a wee bit as well, where I'm leaving the Scottish Socialist Party. Yes, I'm calling you guys out. This is a wee bit of an early roast, a mini roast, if you will. And it's the National Care Service talking here in Scotland. And I say to people, well, you do know that A, the privatisation is actually not the problem. It's a mentality of us being taken care of like 5-year-olds or even babies in the community, with friends, with family, in self-directed care by family members, the person themselves, by consent, not enforcement. Not going to an institution, not going to a death camp dressed up as a caring facility. Yeah, that's a radical. That might be seen as controversial to say, but I've got evidence, guys. Anyone want to at me on Twitter or Twitter or my email? I've got all the evidence, right? I've got all the evidence of this stuff I'm saying today on this podcast. None of this, hot takes, right? For me personally, that gets folded into talking about care of disabled people. If people told you when you can sleep, when you can shit or piss, when you can go out, all the major decisions of your life, is that living? Or is that being coddled and basically removed from decisions of power and having a life to get out of society, to be warehoused in your house or in another institution? Because when people talk about care, we're talking about that kind of care. We're talking about that kind of issue of being taken care of, quote unquote, in a medical sense or in a caring sense. And this is why I have issues with people, because sometimes anarchists, and I understand, and say, oh, well, we're against unjustified hierarchies. Okay, what do you think of medical professionals? Oh, that's a justified hierarchy. Oh, really? Have you had experiences, and this, if they're not disabled, I kind of go off on them and go, well, actually, have you had doctors sign off whether or not you can actually get, for example, support workers in to help you out? No. Have you had the fact that a doctor could actually, with a flick of his or her pen, basically make you go into a mental ward against your will, or other forms of incarceration and confinement? No. Have you had it where it affects your access to stuff at educational level of supports and accommodations? No. In other areas of your life? No. Then you've got no authority to speak about the authority of doctors when you own experience that if you break a bone, or you get sick by COVID, or you get sick from some other disease or temporary ailment, you don't have the permanent shadow of under the benevolence of a medical or social system like that, or police shucking you in a jail until a doctor can come to assess you if you're a threat or not, under the mercy of strangers. So, yeah, unless we actually say what disabled people want and how do we actualize that, that's what I mean by Me Go to Africa actually had a synthesis of this thing. It's imposed onto us what we should have, who we should be, treatment options, guilt tripped, or you're being a nuisance, you're being a burden unless you do this treatment, or die even. In Canada, under Bill C7, which passed a month or two ago, euthanasia is seen as a healthcare option. It's actually legally seen as a healthcare option of killing yourself by the state. It's seen as a healthcare option. This is the madness and the contortions that happens in our society, and therefore this disability needs to be reimagined as a political issue, an economic issue, a social issue, body autonomy issue. Because I have people that are pro-life and body autonomy. Oh, really? Right? Do you think it's okay for people with mental health issues to actually be forced treatment and not discuss treatments and the human rights, all the human rights stripped worse than a prisoner? And it's but they're mental health people. They need to, they'll be dangerous. And then I go, you know what? Fuck off. No. Hopefully that gives you a wee bit of a context where it needs to be led by disabled people organisations. In fact, it's actually in the UN Convention, of Disabled Persons, that all decisions and effects of disabled people need to come from disabled people organisations and disabled people themselves, not imposed. And that's why we have the phrase, nothing about us without us. Because for so much of our history, people have imposed what they want or their convenience for society or for a capitalist class, not us. And until we have that discussion, until we actually begin to have a discussion about what do we actually need as human beings, then it doesn't matter. I don't really care. I mean, people talk about access to medical care, so it doesn't really matter because it's oppressive in its organisation and legal standing.
Nice one. So the next question is going to be about oppression.
I was just going to say that, it also shows that there's no such thing as, apolitical within a society, right? A tool like that people will justify as oh no, but you don't understand. It's to help them. It's well, even if you believe that, you understand that can now be used as a political weapon by whoever's in charge to justify, unlawful detainment of a certain section of the population, right? It's the weaponization of everything. Everything becomes politicized. That's not going to just stay as a thing that's only used on people that really need it, and we really only do it to help people. The second you allow that within a society, it becomes a weapon.
The actual mental health act has actually been used against people that don't want to get the COVID jag or other treatment options or even outside by the police. And it's actually part of the Coronavirus Act in England. You're absolutely right, Ryan. I'm just saying that's an example of a prior act being reformed and adjacent to the Coronavirus Act to basically be oppressive to non-disabled people or people with non-mental health issues, actually using the act, or supposedly it's a mental illness to actually think there's a conspiracy of issues with the vaccines. That's actually happened. So you're absolutely right, Ryan. But people don't see it until the boot lands on them, sadly. I just wanted to add that, but you're absolutely right. Continue, Ryan.
People don't understand the material reality that ideology plays. I've had people, when I've explained to people that, the idea within capitalist societies of, individualization and atomization, the idea that, everyone's on their own. I've had people say, but that doesn't do any harm. What are you talking about? And it could not be more wrong. Because the second you adopt that mentality, that means all your failings are your own, right? There's no such thing as a society, like Margaret Thatcher said, right? There's no such thing as helping each other. It's literally just anything that you can achieve on your own, and that's it, right? And it just it disappears oppression by structures and systems. It just becomes actually everything that's bad to you is entirely your own fault, right? Which people accept for some reason, but like, I don't understand how people don't see that as ridiculous, honestly.
We talk about as communists and as Marxists and people as socialists who want progress. We're talking about the conditions, once the conditions are going to get so bad, people are going to rise up and revolt. And you're also talking about if you are having all your decisions made to you, what kind of life do you have? If you have to ask somebody to go for a fucking piss in your own house, or you have to knock on the door before leaving your fucking dorm room, anything like that is fucking wild. But to me, if I'm to stretch that, maybe desensitize what you're saying a little bit, but with the purpose of giving it a more inclusive perspective on the whole of class domination by the ruling class, is that everybody's life, this is, I think, what globalization exists for, is to have working class people born. They're going to do this, all the roads, all the streets, all the signs, in the same way that like when train tracks were first built in the United States, they were to go to the mine and things. So like infrastructure is literally designed, everything, the base and the superstructure, every building, road, infrastructure is designed to shepherd us in the same way that the ruling class have been shepherding COVID into care homes and, clinics to attack the disabled and the elderly, who they see as a strain on the economy. And what is the economy? The economy is nothing but built off the backs and the wage slavery and the alienation of our life force as working class people. A good point was raised in the chat then by Plough, saying that many people working in these service industries see working, wage slavery as inclusion into society. So, I mean, we're all born, all of our lives are fucking makes us into, I'm just going to say it, fuck, it's ridiculous, but we're like fucking sheep being shepherded here.
Perhaps you could sort of take it on the chin, take it all in one go, and allow the disease, as it were, to move through the population. Without really taking as many draconian measures, I think we need to strike a balance.
They're talking about us with language as if we're a herd of fucking sheep. That's essentially what the fuck we are. So globalization, whether any class you are, your life is almost set up. Even if you study sociology, they call that your life chances, how likely you are to die at an early age because you were forced to do some job that damaged your health. But the problem, and this is where I think we should get back at and be so furious at with the other Marxists to turn this on. We're not just talking about disability here, we're talking about the failings of Marxists today as we advance history towards socialism, is the fact that these are sat back like able-bodied with good credit, reading all day long because they don't have to do fucking anything else because they're not actually struggling that much. The problem with that is the conditions are already so bad. The conditions are already severe. People are literally being murdered intentionally. That's the thing. It's like most of these people, as you said, are going to become disabled at some point in their lives, whether it's through old age or just simple accidents. Then their attitude will fucking change. I bet you they'll see you as the best comrade in the world, saying, oh, everything you're saying is fucking true. But because their material, physical conditions aren't so bad, whether you're black, white, brown, yellow, every shade under the fucking sun, we're oppressed. The conditions are fucking bad. We're heading towards extinction. What the fuck have you got to do, people? I tell you what you've got to do. You've got to stop worshipping whoever, whatever communist it is that you like every single fucking post and everything they do, and then wait for them hand on fucking foot with your fucking parasocial fucking relationships with these fools. Breadtude, you gotta die. Everybody else is gonna get the fucking wall as well, and we've got to build a new Lumpen culture where Lumpen people can connect with each other, share each other's support, and then drive this information up. It's insane, or even backwards, because with Vanguard, we've got to let this information trickle down to these fucking aristocrats or aristocrats.
I mean, we still haven't done an episode on that, and we should, right? Like, I don't know, in the culture industry or like...
Oh, I know. Got to.
Society of the Spectacle.
Oh, God.
We talk about it so much. It's so easy to go over this point, but what is oppression? Oppression, the definition in which we're talking about, is to burden with cruel or unjust impositions or restraints. so that is to subject a burdensome or harsh exercise of authority or power. The disabled people are unquestionably, literally, definitionally oppressed. Just look at instances with like the UK government issuing do not resuscitate orders on COVID patients, as well as what you talked about in the Scottish Parliament, forcing it onto courts to just not even have their truth accepted as if, they're subhuman.
Yeah.
There's a history of proletarian oppression on the disabled people, which talks about in our previous episode on disability and Marxism. Let us do our actual communist, scientific, socialist listeners a favour here. Can you suggest what we need to do to provide solidarity, support, and generally, what can we do for you differently, intellectually, ideologically, or physically, as we are going forwards in our actions that are unquestionably going to shape the future in order to change it from the oppressed mode which it currently functions under? Big question there. I'm sure you've got an answer for us, though.
I'm first going to start, basically, one, understand that disability is, we've got a politics, we've got a culture, we have got a history, we have got, and I'm also going to say that you need to listen to disabled people, and you need to ask the question constantly, who isn't here? An online meeting, an in-person meeting soon, COVID cam soon a little bit. If you don't know anyone disabled, or they're hiding a disability, you've got a problem. Accessibility, where you've got to ask, is this, have a conversation about disability access, right? Because people keep on using the word accessibility, it's almost lost completely all its meaning in a disability context. I call it disability access. Is your physical meeting, wheelchair accessible? Is there provisions to deal with people that are deaf, or partly sighted, or have sight problems, people with mental health issues, people that are autistic or otherwise neurodiverse? Is there a system in place to deal with it in person and as a structure? Because 1 in 5 people in the UK are disabled, so you're going to have some people in your organisation, whether you know it or not, are going to have some kind of less obvious, I hate using the word invisible, less obvious disability. Second, we can't invite people on, and we need to have a process of politicalisation, of political discussion, of disabled stuff like we have today. And I'm going to call out, I don't know if I should call out at the moment, but for me it's very much YouTubers, podcasters, book writers, basically the thought leaders of the left need to get their shit together, either covering disabled people or having disabled people actually come on, like today, and talk about radical disability politics. Reach out to organisations in the UK and the United States and parts of Europe, such as DPAC, Disabled People Against Cuts, Black Triangle, and other radical disabled groups that are fighting against the horrors of COVID-19 and the eugenics and far-right turn it into fascism we're having. If you don't do that, I'm going to call you out. And I want everyone listening to call them out. I want everyone galvanised by what I'm saying to call them out. And I'm also going to say that we need to expunge the notion that Marx talked about, that the Lumpen proletariat are not a revolutionary force. He was wrong on that count. And I'll give you an example. No one wants to accept the fact that some of the biggest uprisings in recent history have been prisoners and has been people in mental wards. There's been actually a lot of people in mental wards uprising against authoritarianism and against the use of the state repression. For example, people in mental wards rebelling against the racist use of psychosis and schizophrenia against black people. An excellent book that protests psychosis. The thing is, there needs to be a process of getting disabled issues and disabled politics and understandings up to the same level as race, class, gender, and sexuality. In other words, unless it's on parity in terms of time, dedication, and actual respect as a political social force and as a distinct group as oppressed, we won't get anywhere. And as I get to my conclusion, what we can do better? Well, firstly, we can go to my roast list of a short list of people and what not to do if you're a podcaster, a shitty little bread tuber, and whatnot. if you're listening, obnoxious anarchist, your video conflating animal liberation with disability and veganism, you would not do that to a black minority of the conflation of animals compared to fucking blacks or other ethnic groups or to gays. And yet you conflated and the video's horrific, of disabled liberation with the quote-unquote dehumanization of people to the realm of animals. I do not know if you're disabled yourself in any particular way, but if you don't have me on, or reach out to any disabled activists in Canada, and there are quite a few, then you're not my comrade. Until you actually do and have live streams, you're not my comrade. And I will poke you and prod you in DMs. I'll actually chase you up on this promise. And if you want to, you can. My email will be in the description of this podcast, my public email, thelessexploitables@gmail.com. And if you don't reach out, you're on the nope list. Non-compete, an ANCOM YouTuber who a couple of, I believe it was late last year, talked about the fact that he is disabled, he's got some medical condition, and accepted that he himself has actually not covered disability issues, and admits this in a video. Non-compete, I actually ask upon you, if you're watching or listening, or people who are fans of him, in his Patreon, because I don't have all the money in the world to subscribe to everyone's fucking Patreons to make these recommendations, I'm sorry to say, and actually implore him to Johnson, American Johnson, who is the host of Non-Compete YouTube channel, to have disabled people on, a disabled caucus, and talk about COVID-19 and disability issues as a political issue, just like racism, sexism, everything else I just described in this section of the podcast. Novara Media, they have broken every promise of working with DPAC and other disabled activists. They've only platformed 3 times, both in their podcasts and sub-podcasts, disabled people. One of them is interviewing Francis Ryan for 20 minutes, talking about disabled feminism. And then the third one is having Peter Singer, who wrote Animal Liberation, talking about for 12 minutes in the mid-March of 2001 on the ethics of killing disabled babies, unopposed. And but Aaron Bastani, the piece of shit, and I'm going to say he's a piece of shit, I mean, he actually had talking about CRISPR, with a gene editing tool, of editing out quote-unquote diseases, in other words, eugenics, of disabled people. And also, he himself did not intervene, and he introduced this actual question in his interview on their YouTube channel, of saying that disabled people have quote-unquote concerns of what you said about disabled people in the past. Concerns my arse. Fuck you. The Vara Media, their YouTube account, their Facebook, Twitter, and other media outlets banned and or blocked disabled people's comments and blocked people messaging them. And in fact, another live stream, the Super Chat, was banning words such as disabled and the actual name of the prior guest. Only when called out on disabled media and by DPAC have they actually, quote-unquote, apologised. But anyone doing a 5-minute Google search will know he's a eugenicist and wants my people gone. I implore people that are following Novara Media on social media and on YouTube to unsub from this disgusting, disablist trash catfire of a YouTube and media platform. They have burnt every single bridge with disabled people, and they must be punished for this, and I will not stop calling them out in public and in private. Then there is other podcasters, other YouTubers that are too numerous to name because it will be half an hour plus me doing so. Every person who makes media, who is a public figure, and who is actually someone that does disabled streams, need to have disabled voices on the plight of COVID-19, austerity, and hate crime, among other issues, or you're not a revolutionary force. I implore the English, and I'll reach out to you at some point, to have me or another member on having a stream about COVID-19 and also talk about disability politics in a Marxist sense, such as in The Very Capitalist Condition and Capitalism and Disability by Martha Russell. In other words, your silence, your conspiracy of silence on this issue, of ignoring, no, not including any people from the largest minority in the world, Disabled people, the World Health Organization has estimated that 1 billion people on the planet can be legally considered disabled. That's almost the population of India, completely ignored from everything from climate change all the way to COVID-19. So I say to you again, if you know this, if you hear this podcast, and yet do not reach out, do not email me, do not reach out to this podcast, to Shibby and to Ryan, about getting me or how to get contact with disabled activists and people that are in this particular fight, are not my comrades. You are a betrayer and you are my oppressor. And until that's called out by people listening to this podcast, by their followers and their viewers, this genocide of my people will continue, and the ignorance of these issues will continue until we are extinct in the coming horizon of genetic engineering and major biomedical interventions against our will. That's what I say to people. Either join in or get the fuck out. And that's the whole point. When I've been pushed out of major political parties, activist groups such as Extinction Rebellion, and a whole host of social and economic issues, and actually clinging to comrades which see me as a valuable member, that is not an aberration. It is the norm. You do not want me, for I disrupt, like the podcast today, notions of class, ability, humanity, and more importantly, the true underbelly, the true heart of capitalism is disableism, not racism, not classism, disableism, your ability to work. And until that understanding permeates the online left and online and organisations, rather than being in the UK, for example, I'm going to give an example, I'm wrapping up the one, in media of quote-unquote benefit claimants on reference to disabled people, or quote-unquote the infamous shielders, and yet have nobody on. I also call on Owen Jones, who has had every single person on apart from disabled people. There's wonderful people in DPAC, such as Ellen Clifford, who wrote the amazing book, Disabled People, War Against Disabled People, or even Frances Ryan, a fellow journalist at The Guardian, Owen, and yet you do not invite her on to talk about disability during COVID-19 and austerity. Shame on you. And as I begin to rise, this is engineered. This is not how it should be. This is your complicit absence. In the words of Martin Luther King, we remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And that's basically me doing my freaking roasting. And if you have any problems with what I say about, oh, well, you know, we don't have time, make time. Make an effort. And if you don't, you're allowing 90,000 disabled people to die. You're allowing austerity and all the problems we got, and I talk about my speeches, to be silenced and suffering alone in their homes with their families. And that's unacceptable. And you call yourself human if you allow that to happen. Goodness me.
Thank you, Emily. Important points to go through. Not my comrade, first and foremost. If you're not struggling with me, if you're not struggling with the oppressed, as for like these other opportunists I've never seen over media, I don't watch all these other idiots on YouTube. I don't watch nothing or listen to nobody that isn't revolutionary or at least has a cultural critique that it reinforces anti-capitalism. I just don't fuck with liberals, but in no way, shape or form. But because there's a lot of people out there who do, and you're obviously aware of the trends and you can stay on top of it to see where everybody else's consciousness is at, which is important, and we need comrades doing that exact same thing. Then, you know, we need to critique these motherfuckers and in the art opportunities, you know, talking about animal liberation, talking about animal feminism, like whatever obscure new trend it seems to be with these liberals who hop onto, and then these opportunists are like, oh, there's a new trend, there's some new potential followers to get them on board and we can talk this shit. They don't really fucking care about nothing other than their own fucking platforms and materialism. These are scumbags, if you ask me, and it's just a pure conscious strategy to get like these obscure people on, or even like cause controversy sometimes. Very important figure that you raised. There's 1 billion people who could be legally disabled on planet Earth. That to me is just astronomically, and at the end of the day, we should be human beings first and put all human beings in the same category. Now, of course, we understand there's a political struggle that we have to bring to alleviate these contradictions in different classes. And that's where we have to push ourselves intellectually, because society and the state is never going to do that for us. We do have to reach out to comrades like Henry, join Revolutionary Lumpen Radio, speak to all other comrades who come on the show in our Discord. Again, we have to learn from each other and get resources, because we have to do the study ourselves. Particularly if you don't have the practice, then you have to see who's lived this shit. And us Marxists, we're more than happy and willing to talk about it. And talking about Marx and his opinion going back, and people need to get over his opinion on the lumpen proletariat. It is true. I've failed myself and everybody else during this time when I haven't actually released on the lumpen in the Imperial Core. That needs to go on Marxist.org, or again, blood's going to be spilled. Like, no bullshit, because I've lived this shit, but the reason I haven't actually done this text for other people to see what a Marxist analysis of an actual lumpen to other proles. You know, for example, I know people like Caleb Morpin's done them. I know there's a few other comrades who've done on the lumpen within the last year or two, but they've never been lumpen themselves. So the reason I haven't put it out is because I'm still learning so much. But sex workers, done sex work Marxism series. I've learned a lot about that. You know, all these other classes within the lumpen class, all these other stratas, including the disabled. I should maybe include the elderly, who knows, and also the homeless. I'm still constantly engaging with these other classes. So it's like every day where I do speak to you, like I said, my mind blows and I learn so much. So the work is coming. It's going to be a summarization of everything that I'm learning from a comrade who I engage with and, you know, speak to, like I'm learning from Emily now, along with everybody else. So, you know, these interviews are really, it's actual study, it's actual research. This is intellectual labor, what we're doing now. And this is something that, of course, even the disabled people are more than capable of doing, of getting heavily involved in intellectual labor. Emily's speech at the start, you know, all of her writing since then, she had to sit down and put the time in to express her thoughts when, again, we only know what we know to make us good workers. So we have to push ourselves and we have to support each other. And it's daunting. We're up against a lot here, people, but we need solidarity, we need love, we need support, and we also need to take the power away from those with power. And we're talking about the bread tubers, the opportunists, and all these other fools who aren't listening to the most oppressed. Oh, and eugenics was mentioned briefly, but, you know, we spoke about that in our last episode, so people have a good chance to listen to that for analysis on eugenics. Yes. But thank you for that, Emily.
I mean, I could walk all over those topics, honestly. Like, anything about, like, eugenics, never forget that, like, the Nazis took inspiration from America on that point. And when you want to talk about, like, Marx being wrong on the revolutionary potential of the lumpen, that's for sure true. I mean, that was shown even more recently. There were letters exchanged between Mao and Stalin, right? Stalin taking the sort of that position, the traditional, you know, Marxist position of the lumpen not being a revolutionary class, and Mao obviously moved past that. And the CCP at that time incorporated, you know, it had giant peasant elements essentially, right? So Mao understood the revolutionary potential of the lumpen, and he disagreed with Stalin on this, right? This is why I generally favor Mao over Stalin for that one reason and others. Yeah, so it's not an immaterial difference. It's not like, well, what does that matter, right? Like, it's real.
Yep. So we got another question for you here. We're almost done here. Provided us with so much. Again, what I'd like to do with this series is, because we're going to have Stones back on. He was the guest in the Wall 2 episode. Stone's going to come back on. He's going to have a similar set of questions and engage with their own experience from there. So, of course, as being scientific socialists, we're trying to recreate these experiments, and the experiments being these questions, and the results are going to be the answers in which we get off a guest. So if, you know, all of this is validated, if all of our disabled people are answering similar questions in the same way, it just shows that it is the goddamn truth. You know what I mean? Somebody fucking can't deny that shit. Emily, we can wrap up here. I'm sweating off this. It's been a hell of a goddamn experience. Undoubtedly, we're going to continue to support you on this show. and platform you whenever. It would be good to actually speak to you more about Africa, I think. Have you got anything else you'd like to add or discuss, or even ask us before we move on to the plugs?
Yeah, I mean, we had that discussion actually, like before coming on there, about me actually struggling to not be objective, but not be so emotional that it overwhelms me and basically sob. And that because I've actually come close talking about this, like, in lectures I've done, and actually recently in March I did another lecture about disability rights and politics and everything to another group, and we were rehearsing it with my friend Olivia, and I just broke down crying because it's just, you get to the point where these are not statistics, these are people with lives and dreams and hopes, and they were denied humanity, they were denied a chance, they were denied to live a full life on their terms, not our terms, their terms, their norms, and their life choices. I'm also fighting so that I don't die. And I feel that I realised last weekend, actually, who's going to speak up to me if I die by the state. There's this, I call it political jealousy. When George Floyd died, it was uprisings. And I remember Kanye West, I think it was like Democracy Day or something like that. He's a big black intellectual thinker. I think Ryan knows who he is. I don't know if you know who he is, Shibby. He was like, oh, imagine that he died and nobody cared and nobody came out. And something about the phraseology about, aren't we lucky that people came out and care enough? And all of a sudden, like the recent bullshit of my friends with COVID-19 last summer and austerity and the past couple of years of hitting our heads against a brick wall against the state up here in Scotland and all the rest of it, deaths of people I know personally going unnoticed, and in the rhetoric, I just sobbed and screamed at the screen going, that's what I've got to deal with. That's what every disabled person in the Imperial Core has to deal with. We die and nobody comes and sees us. Nobody comes and makes a vigil for us apart from our own people. Like, nobody marches in the street at anger at disabled people dying by COVID-19, like I discussed today in this podcast, or murdered by their family, or what have you, or abused and neglected. And then it happened again a couple of weeks ago with that woman, Sarah something. She getting murdered in Chatham, and the vigil and the outrage up and down the country. And then it hit me again. If I were to die by the state, only my family and comrades I know in person would be outraged. But I'll be another statistic. It hit me this epiphany. I was sobbing on Friday night of like going, oh my God, my people are so alienated. We are so hyper segregated. We're so pushed to the margins of society that people are not emotionally roused at my death as an injustice. That's where we're at. And that's where some of the anger and the frustration and the pain, I think, is kind of leaking into part of this podcast, where that realization that I'm guilt tripping people because, like, you're allowing that social and political environment to persist, where I'm even in environmental movement, I had to leave it because I did a whole lecture about it, of us being seen as, expected losses of a climate ecological collapse, eco-fash bullshit. And I feel that now during COVID-19, better us than them. It's to the point where I'm like, I want to grab people and force open their eyeballs and watch videos and fucking images and shit of autistic people getting abused and us getting abused and all the horrors, and say, look, don't turn away, don't close your eyes, look, these are my people, and you've done nothing. You've done nothing for my people apart from pity parties or giving to charity and thinking that'll be enough. And that's why I get angry, that's why I get upset to the point of sobbing. I sob at night thinking, I need to make the political consciousness, put a bit class consciousness, I want to say human consciousness of humanity. And the very fact that a section of humanity can be so alienated that people don't bat an eye at almost 100,000 deaths of my people and not see it as a genocide, not see it literally the UN definition of genocide, or see it as social murder, like you talked about, Ryan, as well, and touched upon, and thinking, I need to do something about this, I need to organise, I need to get people around me that are inspired by me and moved by me, by my heart and my soul, and none of this rhetoric shit, none of this playing it by numbers, none of this, I'm going to do a speech, but really it's just me, you know, rubbing my own fucking ego. And I think people don't quite get it, that I've been screaming into the void and begging fucking, when you're talking to fucking ministers and begging groups to please talk about disability, people at Extinction Rebellion for basic accessibility issues, and covered it up in hate crime, and I've got a whole talk about that you can link. Or getting traumatized by that and getting traumatized by the silence of, you know, and it's a send a signal to me, you're not worth our time. Your life, your beauty, your amazing personality, everything you are, and other people I know personally, and people I know are very good friends in disabled charity and disabled groups, that their lives don't matter. And people go, Emily, don't get upset, you know, like, you know, you need to be nice and calm and, you know, overreacting. It's like, well, we expect me to react when I'm dealing with this sort of alienation and being pushed out and on the fringes of society because of my Tourette's and hate crimes, and just general life is hard. And then I get into a political group and it's like, oh, we don't think that's relevant to my face, or we just deal with racism here, and then I talk about sexism and then other isms, and I'm like, well, wait a fucking minute here. Or they say, Emma, you're doing what about ism? It's like, yeah, I'm saying what about my people are literally the most oppressed group statistically in terms of death, in terms of lack of healthcare, extreme poverty. For example, in Scotland, half of all people in extreme poverty have a disabled person in their household. Half. Not a third, not a quarter, not a fifth, a half. And yet people here won't hear it. And I'm like, that silence is killing us. That silence is making us suffer. That silence is betrayal and is complicity. You know, and also I want to very quickly kind of say, to kind of round off, because we've talked about out there, we've talked about, you know, out there in the wider world and out there, but it's very difficult to talk about my own experiences because I'm so extremely traumatized, and so it's easy talking about, you know, this thing and this political theory and that. When people talk about, you know, I've been seen as appropriating black struggle before I discovered my history of my people. And I say my people, I've been all disabled people, all people that experience disablement, just like all people that experience racism or sexism as a social and political class, etc. That Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, Stuart Carmichael, all the people from the Black Panthers and other radical black groups, they were the only people that had a similar language of oppression and death until I found my own. And I think there's a problem where disabled people are cut off even from their own history. We talked about a wee bit today, their own culture, and shamed about themselves. And I remember crying when I first heard of it. Ironically, it was actually like a couple of months after getting my autism diagnosis, or I found it on YouTube, of Malcolm X's speech talking about who taught you to hate yourself. And obviously it was in a racial context, but so much of it resonated with me as a neurodiverse / disabled person. I feel that there's a problem where I also need to reach out to other disabled people to radicalize them, to have their political consciousness, just like we reach out to working class people and have like class consciousness. And so this is unacceptable. You don't have to accept the death and the suffering and everything else. I see this not out of ego, and being on this podcast not out of ego, but out of horror. I've got nightmares of, you know, waking up and I'll be forced into death camps or concentration camps. What do you think, you know, care homes are? What do you think, you know, care in a community bullshit is? It's taking people like me out of the community for my quote-unquote own good into a camp. It's the first stage of disabled concentration camps. People don't see that. Oh, you're a confident woman and you're disabled. It's like, yeah, but I've got nightmares because my family's a survivor of the Holocaust. Like, I've actually got family that I had my grandpa before he died in November. His whole side of the family survived the Holocaust. And I thought, oh my God, my people are having their own Holocaust again in Europe and in the UK. Are going to go down fighting. If I'm going to die by these bastards, I want to go down fighting. I don't want to go down like a whimper. I don't want to go down like a coward. There's too many communists that are, I call them revolution romanticists. They romanticize the revolution. They're like, yeah, you want to romanticize the revolution? Yeah, I'm up against the wall. My people are fucking dying. We're getting genocided. We're getting killed left, right and centre. We're like a corner panther, ready to strike. You're just cowards. We're ready to die fighting for my my right to life. And I just want to kind of say that if any disabled people that are listening, or people that may not think they're disabled, because barely even like 40% of people identify as disabled out of shame and guilt. No, you are disabled. You've got disablement. If you've got issues of, you talked about here, or discrimination, or made fun of for some bodily or mind difference or neurodivergence, you are disabled. And I say, look, you're heard. There's people out here like myself that are fighting for you. And I know that you might not be in a position to fight and come with us, but I hope that in your heart you actually, it gives you warmth and able to sleep at night, that there's people that are willing to fight and even die, even if need be, for this cause, so that you can be free of the pain and the fear and everything. And that's what makes me upset of these fucking communists and socialists and YouTubers and all the rest of it, is that they don't get the power dynamics, they don't get anything. And I'm just going to say that I get so angry and so upset, and it makes me think, all right, okay, so you talk about race and class and gender, but you not talk about this because of social capital. Your brand will go down. The SSP, the Scottish Socialist Party, said to me in an interview a couple of months ago, weeks ago, sorry, and I'm going to say this, because I'm at the point, like, fuck it. We can't deal with disabled issues because we're not a big enough party. It was an hour freaking talk with two major people, including Richie Venson, who anyone that knows, in Scotland, you know who he is, and getting betrayed by people that supposedly have my back and other groups as well. And I just raged at that point. Wow, you're not a big enough party to deal with disabled issues. Like, fuck off. Like, we're dying in all the horrors we have today. If we went over, this evening in this podcast, and you're not willing to stand for us, like an actual new Holocaust, which I don't have any better word to say than Holocaust. And that hurt me. And that's why I've got my rage. That's why I've got such a high standard. And I hope people can see the integrity in a high principled communist that I am, and go, right, she's so principled, she's and getting upset and genuinely upset, not crocodile tears about this shit. And I just wanted to make that clear. And I know that's quite a lot, and it's going to be a long podcast, but I felt that I had to say this at the end, because we're scattered about my own feelings, we're scattered about my own experiences a little bit, like we've touched on it, but that's why I do what I do. I want my friends, people that are scared or not as articulate or not have the gift of me being hyperverbal autistic and absorbing absorbing information I do, to fight, to do talks, to do speeches, to basically get my size 10 boot up their arse. And they call us unempathetic. We talk about Autism Awareness Month. They call us unempathetic and uncaring, when in society we allow this kind of thing, or homelessness, or what have you, Ryan, what you talked about earlier. They just normalise it, that suffering, and they call us unempathetic, like these neurotypicals, these non-autistics and non-neurodivergent people. And I just wanted to make that clear, understood to anyone listening, and I hope that's inspired people to kind of reach out on an emotional and deep human level. I'm the hardcore of the hardcore. I've been in this, and everything I said here is truth, and I'm willing to kind of fight with you if you say, I see you, Emily, let's fucking do this, like a couple of people are starting to do. And I'm going to rile them, and I know you and Ryan and everyone on this podcast and other places and other comrades in the server and everything else are going to be behind me. I'm just going to leave it. I just want to say in my closing statements on this particular thing that I don't want a revolution if it excludes my people. If the utopian idea of communism is that I don't exist, I don't want any part of it. And if you want to entrench that, if you want to embolden that, if you want to put that forward, fuck off. Then you're my oppressor, you're my enemy, and I'm going to fight as much as any capitalist or liberal or fascist, because you want to erase me and people like me in the future, the wonderful, beautiful spectrum of humanity.
Hell yeah. Yeah, totally. Solidarity, sister, forever. That. What I would suggest that we do before I go on to my thoughts is I'd like to follow up on it at least every 6 months to every year, and then we can analyse the history and see if it's moving forward or seeing whether it's regressing. And we can also do comparisons as to what we thought last year. Has the movement took these lessons on board, or if these simply just, like I say, are we regressing further? So let's do this again in 6 months to a year. We can analyse the left then and Marxists going forwards whilst we actually continue to press on this progress within Marxism, which not many motherfucking other people are doing besides disabled people, like you said. I saw this fury within himself, this disgust and disappointment and just heartbreak, where he said it's funny that whenever I do these posts about, disabled people, oppression, genocide, it's only ever the disabled Marxist and people who even like or share the tweets. So he himself, despite his platform, despite having so much more followers than us, and so many people who engage in all his tweets within seconds, it's only really the oppressed disabled people who care about spreading the message on oppressed and disabled people out there. So it's not just us, but it is us who's willing to risk our platforms so that we can fucking agitate people enough to fucking do something about it and start these discussions, which we'll return to.
Yeah, I was going to comment on that very quickly. That kind of cold shoulder indifference actually made me kind of want to leave politics completely, totally abdicate any effort into anything political ever again, like on the left or anything. Like, just totally go fuck it. Kind of green activism, or that is it. Like, draw a line under it and go, you know what, fuck them. That level of pain and trauma. And I think you just summed it up really well. And people don't understand that, of losing someone like me because they just don't care, about me as a person, or even having accessibility crap, or activist stuff and accommodations, even in their movements. So it becomes, why should I care about your fucking revolution if you're going to treat me like shit? I just wanted to add that,
I felt that, on and off for fucking time. It's only with the support from people reaching out through this project, etc., and showing that it actually fucking matters to a lot of people, where, I felt it was justified, because you touch upon your crying, your suffering, your nightmares. And that's the thing. Like, you're doing this out of genuine, it got to a point with me as well where, you're just in such a shit position. You've been forced into fucking shitty situations just to fucking try and get by, or anything like that. And it's like you've suffered so much because of the consequences of those decisions, or whether it's just the consequences of your physical disabilities. In your case, we as Marxists and as progressives, we have to turn our pain into suffering. We have to turn these life lessons into something progressive so that other people can learn from it. Otherwise, what was the point in the pain? We have to turn our pain into power. And that's really the thing about it, is a lot of the Marxists out there, they've never had the pain. They've had so many creature comforts all the goddamn life. And they've had a close-knit family that, share the thoughts with them, and they've had all of this support nearby, and supporting each other as fucking wage slaves or as fucking consumers. And we're out here alienated as motherfuckers, ostracized from fucking organisations, despite living precarious fucking existences. So I completely have got that point where it's like, why? Why would I even help them? These motherfuckers are fools. I mean, these people have literally taken leave of the senses and talking emotions and just seeing and hearing and everything. These are the ones, as you were getting at, these are the most able people, yet these are the ones who seem to be blind, who seem to be deaf, who seems to be unable to communicate, and the ones who are uncaring, as the stereotype towards autistic people is. So that's really a contradiction that they need to look at within themselves, because as we know, we have to eliminate all contradictions to get to communism, and at the moment, they're the only things standing in our way for progress, for love, for unity, for solidarity, and for peace and progress. So I think we could sum it up there. Ryan, have you got any thoughts, mate?
I mean, I was just going to say on that last point, right? But that brings us full circle to they don't understand it because they haven't experienced it, right?
That's what we try and do here.
So we go to separate schools, we go to sometimes even separate workplaces, separate parts of a hospital. The only time we actually might see somebody is on a bus. And therefore, it's actually the worst type of apartheid, which is total two-tier system, two different parallel societies on top of each other. The other group, where I say, well, actually, disabled shouldn't be segregated from schools or work, they defend it. And I turn around and go, well, hold on, if I was talking about a black child that had behavioural issues, you would find it really disgusting of having, separate but equal for a black child. There's this, you get the capitalist apologists, these are disabled apologists, and justify the treatment of disabled people, and I see it a lot on the left and a lot of in socialists and communists, and I just want to kind of say that those are the kind of people that I had to restrain myself from actually physically attacking. Like, it's that kind of feeling I get where I'm like, you're defending my quote-unquote right to be oppressed. People don't see it. And I kept on saying to English and a couple of other people, it's like, you don't understand marginalisation, how you deal with disabled people. And I didn't touch it because they don't want to touch it. They've got the other 74% or whatever are uncomfortable with the point of actual physically and emotionally avoiding disabled people. I'm at the point where I'm like, okay then, and I don't care. That's very difficult, and I just want to say at the end of the podcast, I always ask people, why don't you care about disabled people? Why don't you care about me? That's unreasonable. And if it's a full circle, so well, why is it unreasonable? Why is my suffering unreasonable to talk about, but not black people or LGBT people or women or people in working class? Why am I the only group that's actually offensive? Yeah, that's right. See, it's offensive to compare to other groups, but someone can compare being black to being gay or being black to being a woman or some other shit, other mental contortions. And I also want to thank you and Ryan for having me on and platforming me and these ideas and perspectives, and a lot of people wouldn't really think about or know or understand. And I just want to say that, and holding space for the pain, the heart and the trauma of that happening to me, of being pushed out of political organisations, and having to find real comrades and real people that would accept and listen, and actually being kind of socially and politically silenced. I just want to say that quickly, as we end the podcast, like, I want to make that clear, that everyone would give me the chances that you're giving me right now.
Oh, the pleasure is truly ours.
Indeed. Where can people find you, Comrade Emily? Where can they support you, your work? And do you have any plugs for our listeners to check out, which we can include in the show notes?
Yeah, I'm only just starting to put my infrastructure up. It's not like I'm a Twitter or Facebook or whatever veteran. But the handle will be down in the description, as always, Shibby, as you do a great job of that. It would be The Less Exploitables on Twitter and also on YouTube. The YouTube is a bit barren, but I'm planning to have a space of comrades up here in Scotland that are disabled, that are marginalised, my speeches, if I can get the raw files for that at some point as well, among other things. And there's a little bit of a explain why Twitter and YouTube are called The Less Exploitables. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, it makes sense. The Less Exploitables. We will continue, obviously, to platform, and we'll share all of that in the show notes. We really do hope that people actually take on board everything that you're saying in terms of reaching out, giving you support. It does mean the world. Hopefully people are going to fucking listen to this shit, and hopefully next time we speak or people hear your voice on this podcast, it's going to be a lot more enthusiastic in terms of the progress of this movement. But it takes our listeners now to continue to get involved and support, and simply just reaching out is one way to do that, and sharing and liking. All of those things are important when scumbags have social capital and opportunists have social capital, but progressives, real revolutionaries, don't. So with that said, we will look forward to getting you back at least within 6 months as a situation report on the struggle and the battle that we're engaged in this class war. And we'll also, again, for everybody else, continue to platform disabled comrades. Very soon we'll have Disability Marxism 3, again, where we can do a scientific experiment with the questions and the answers from a comrade in that. But if you want to support us in Revolutionary Lumpen Radio, go to our Patreon immediately, patreon.com/Lumpen podcast. Definitely check out that link. It's in the show notes. Supporters, we're going to be doing Save the People programs. You're going to see people getting fed, so nobody can be coming up saying we're not Vanguard, because we're doing the shit that all of them have been saying is practice for years. So if I don't have a revolution in my estate, then I can just say, well, look, that practice is no good. But hopefully we can build an organization in my community, and you'll see the post followed up on patreon.com/Lumpen podcast. Follow us on Twitter @Lumpen_radio. Check out Ryan's YouTube. The Zen Marxist on YouTube just made over 1,000 subs. Congrats. Shout out Late Stage Imperialism. We'll be streaming a lot of episodes in the future. Thanks for all of those in the chat now who have been chatting away. And to all those trolls in the comments, fuck you. Your comments have been deleted. You're nothing to me. You've been exterminated from the face of reality. And I forgot everything you said. So with that said, thank you so much, Emily, for sharing your heart, your fucking feelings, your emotions with us, rather than just shit that you've read on some book somewhere and you just share them for clout. Thank you so much. We really hope that it hits home for people.